Should say hello, shouldn't I?
G'day, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Sorry? What was that?
John, are we in session or a brief suspension?
Yeah.
Like,
Are we live or on a brief suspension?
We are live. We're live. Could people please take their seats as we get underway? Welcome representatives from NBN Co. Welcome, Mr. Morrow. Would you like to make an opening statement?
I would, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, please.
So thank you for the opportunity to make about a 10-minute opening statement. My colleagues and I welcome the opportunity to outline the vision for NBN Co. and update you on our progress. Indeed, you can, Senator.
Thank you.
Shall I proceed?
Continue, Mr. Morrow. Yeah. Just slowly and clearly, if you could, please. Very
Yes,
important.
of course. Our team knows NBN is Australia's largest infrastructure project, and we are all aware of our position as custodians of this taxpayer investment. After 8 weeks in the job, one thing I've particularly noticed is that some people seem to think the multi-technology mix, or MTM, is just another word for fiber to the node. I'd like to be clear for everybody. MTM is not a technology, nor is it a prescription for a particular technology. We see MTM as an issue of flexibility. The government statement of expectation provides NBN Co. with, and I'm quoting here, flexibility and discretion in operational, technology, and network design decisions. Nowhere in that document are we told what technology we must use. In the past, NBN Co. would do the detailed design for an area and then have no choice but to use fiber to the prem at a much higher cost and regardless of if the infrastructure already existed. With the new government expectations, we will take an MTM approach which allows some discretion on how to deploy fast broadband in the most timely and cost-efficient way. At a recent Senate Select Committee, I commented on how our organizational culture is crucial to our success and is something that we need to get right in order to meet the challenges ahead. Improving our culture goes beyond what we do internally. As our product development and delivery depends on many external partners working closely with our own employees, we know we must take incremental steps to engage and work more closely with our access seekers, our delivery partners, and our suppliers. To support this, we recently held a supplier summit meeting with executives from 20 different partner companies that ranged from those who manufacture our telecom equipment to those who install our cable to those who provide key support services. The aim was to clarify our direction, provide alignment on objectives, and have a candid discussion about what more our company needs to do to ensure we deliver on our commitments to the government and to the taxpayers. Our partners were frank and forthright. They wanted us to improve on our rollout forecast, to overhaul our processes, and to eliminate our internal silos. I tell you this today because it highlights the approach we are taking to improve our delivery. We are serious about aligning both internal and external organizations on a shared vision with common goals. Another example is simply getting the incentives right in our partner contracts so the focus is on connecting premises, not just passing them. We know that this will be a big step towards eliminating some of the major causes of customer frustration, namely long service activation delays and held orders. A key requirement in building a trusting relationship with our partners and customers is providing clear and accurate information about our services and the timing of the rollout to any given area. At the Select Committee hearing earlier this month, senators asked about the information on our website and whether it met the standards of clarity and transparency expected of a publicly funded project. We have spent quite a bit of time looking into what we have historically provided and what is necessary to ensure interested parties are properly informed about the status and plans of the project. Let me assure you, we are committed to putting more information into the public domain, and work is underway to deliver on this commitment. There is no hidden intent to conceal what we are doing, but we cannot offer more quantity in the hope to overcome the poor quality of the data that we make available. To reiterate, we seek accuracy, reliability, and relevancy in what we will make public. Individuals and businesses across Australia need to be able to rely on this information, and we want it to be right. We now have an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past where expectations were raised and often not met. I know this committee expects us to be transparent, and rightfully so. Some have implied we should restore what was on the website in the past. And if the suggestion is that NBN should rush information out before we have stabilized the rollout and before we have confidence in the forecast, then we respectfully disagree. Right now, we are redesigning our website, and we intend for this to be the source of the latest, most accurate, and most useful information about the NBN. We know that different types of information are required by different stakeholders, and we will take this into account in what information is provided. We are hoping to have this new website up and running in the coming months, but again, only when we are comfortable with the reliability of the data. Moving on to a recent milestone for the company, we have released the Fixed Wireless and Satellite Review. As you know, this was an independent third-party analysis of our wireless technologies, plans, and progress. The key finding was that demand for services outside the fixed line footprint is far greater than the estimated in the last corporate plan. The report now forecasts the total number of connections could be up to 620,000 by 2021. The review makes recommendations on how to deal with this increase in demand, which quite simply can't be done through the existing programs. Firstly, the review recommends expanding the fixed wireless footprint to include 85% more premises than originally planned. That would mean doubling the number of towers to 2,700. The review also suggests expanding fiber to the node to a further 25,000 premises who would previously have received wireless or satellite access. We learned through the experiences of the interim satellite service that satellite capacity limitations need to be carefully managed. We are committed to meeting the speed expectations set by the government, but the capacity allowance must be less than what can be offered in the other technologies. The review also found that both the fixed wireless and long-term satellite projects are behind schedule. An example of this is the timing of the release of the first satellite services, which is now forecast to be early 2016. Another challenge highlighted in the review is the absence of the necessary spectrum to cover roughly 80,000 homes in outer metropolitan areas. These recommendations are now with government, but despite nearly tripling the number of users, the overall expenditure is only forecast to increase by 33% and therefore stay within the approved peak funding envelope. I'd also like to mention last week's disconnection date for the first 15 FSAMs. This has been a major priority for the company for many months, and we've worked closely with Telstra, the ACCC, RSPs, and other stakeholders in getting these communities ready. We paid particular attention to the most vulnerable members of these communities. For example, we established a medical alarm register, which this week had more than 40,000 records. Even with this effort, there were still some premises which had not migrated last Friday. As this was the first of what will be many more disconnection dates, we approached this beta trial in a controlled manner, allowing us to understand the issues and obstacles and to refine the process going forward. We know all members of government want to be sure this process does not negatively impact the end user, so I will reiterate that Telstra is only disconnecting premises when we are confident that end users fully understand the consequences and have provided confirmation. Finally, one of the things I've learned in my 8 weeks in this job is that the CEO of NBN Co. is bound to face questions about their suitability for this position. In leading one of the world's most ambitious infrastructure projects funded entirely by the Australian taxpayer, it is to be expected. It is appropriate, and I don't shy away from it. The most recent examples of this scrutiny can be seen in the several media articles that have appeared in the past week. They dealt with the 2-year period in my career when I worked for a utility company in the United States called Pacific Gas and Electric Company, or commonly referred to as PG&E. After I left this company, 2 incidents occurred in the cities of San Bruno and Rancho Cordova that caused the tragic loss of 9 lives. I acknowledge the actions taken by PG in the wake of these tragedies and addressed the issues involved and provided compensation to the families and communities who were affected. The article also mentions formal legal action currently underway in the United States that relates to the San Bruno incident. This type of corporate legal proceeding for compensation is what's known in the U.S. as shareholder derivative lawsuits. As the name suggests, they are ordinarily brought about by shareholders, and they typically name all the senior officers and directors of the company involved. This case is no exception. The parties that are named in the shareholder actions include virtually every person who was a director or senior officer at PG&E between 1995 through 2013. My name is one of 20 that were named, even though I was only employed by PG&E for 2 years that began in August of 2006 and ran through August of 2008. I will continue to vigorously defend the proceedings. I believe that when the legal process runs its course, it will confirm that my fellow directors, officers, and I acted with care, in good faith, and in the best interest of PG&E at all times. I was upfront about these issues when I spoke to both the board of NBN Co. and the government during the recruitment process for the role of CEO. Reference is also made to a U.S. government action against PG&E. No officers or directors of PG&E have been named in that matter. In fact, the company has denied that any PG&E employee knowingly violated any relevant federal law. In the 2 years that I was at PG&E, the company worked hard to provide customers with safe, reliable, and affordable energy. The company significantly increased both gas capital expenditures and spending on gas operations and maintenance. This particular legal process rolls on. As the matters are still before the U.S. courts, which I must respect, I am unable to comment any further, other than to make one final important point. I regard safety as paramount. I always have, and I continue to do so here at NBN Company. I believe no task is more important than ensuring the safety of workers and the communities that we serve. There is, of course, a lot of work underway within NBN. We are in the process of putting together the next corporate plan, and we are on track to get this to the government within the required timeframes. Our weekly statistics currently show more than 191,000 premises are connected to the NBN across all 3 technologies. We know this is not enough, and our team is focused on reaching the millions of Australians as quickly and efficiently as we can. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank you for the time for the opening statement, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. And who would like to lead off questions? Senator Conroy.
Thank you. Thank you for that opening statement. I've got a whole range of questions that come for it. Can I just clarify, did you write this all yourself? Was it prepared by you?
I wrote it myself, and then I sought advice from others.
Which others?
Our general counsel within the company, or the general counsel that's associated with Pacific Gas and Electric Company.
Okay, and anyone outside NBN Co?
No, other than those that I mentioned with the council,
yep.
yes.
Okay, so it's entirely your own work?
Correct.
The words. Yeah, good. Good, just want to know who to hold responsible. Now, as you've indicated, there's been some press, and you've commented on it in your opening statement, about some matters in the US. So I just wanted to clarify a few facts about it. Now, you joined Pacific Gas and Electric, was it on the 15th of August 2006?
That sounds correct, yes.
As President and Chief Operating Officer?
That is correct.
Now, according to a press release from Pacific Gas and Electric, you were announced as CEO of the company in February 2007. So you were promoted to CEO just 6 months after joining the company, is that correct?
It was a year after that I was made Chief Executive Officer.
So I've just been looking at a press release from Pacific Gas and Electric where they announced you. Now, maybe you had a later starting date.
That's possible.
But the press release was in February 2007, which is 6 months after you joined the company.
That may be true, Senator,
Yeah,
yes.
I just wanted to clarify when you actually became the CEO. So PG&E entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy in April 2001 and emerged from bankruptcy in 2004, is that correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Graham Phillipson, writing in IT Wire this week, notes that you were, quote, brought into PG&E to help turn the company around. And Mitchell Benjamin, writing in The Australian in January this year, said Mr Morrow is considered a turnaround specialist within the global mobile group. Is that a fair description to call yourself? That's what other people seem to be calling you, a turnaround specialist?
I think that's what others refer to as some of my background, Senator.
Yeah. So was your experience as a turnaround specialist part of the reason you were hired at PG&E?
I believe it was to help take a 150-year-old company and modernize many of its practices.
Okay. Now, the press release announcing your appointment as CEO of Pacific Gas and Electricity Company on the 27th of February. Now, it may be that, as I said, the discrepancy between your memory and the press release may be that it was, I'll get some clarification on that, was that it announced on that day that you'd be taking over later. But the press release said that you would, and I quote, lead and manage all of the utilities operations. Is that a correct description of your role?
My job as the CEO of the utility was to manage the operations.
Okay, now you ceased as CEO effective 31st of August 2008, is that correct?
That sounds correct, Senator.
Now, the Guardian article states that you left the company to return to the telecommunication industry. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You went back to Voda, or you went to Voda?
To Clearwire at that point.
Clearwire at that point, okay. And when did you start with Voda?
I started with Vodafone in March of 2012.
2012, great, thanks. Now, the Guardian article indicates, and I think you've made reference to it, that an explosion occurred in Pacific Gas and Electricity Company's gas pipeline network in San Bruno in September 2010. Is that correct?
I was not at the company at that time. I assume that's what you're reading within the articles.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm sure you've looked into this since the articles, but that sounds right, September 2010 was San Bruno?
It does sound about what I've read as well, Senator, yes.
So, as I think you've indicated, I understand that this explosion happened after your time at the company, but investigations into the explosion point to the developments that occurred during your tenure that are relevant to these questions. And I think my clarification is it was announced on the 27th of February, effective the 1st of July. So about 11 months from when you started.
Correct.
And what was the magnitude of this explosion?
I don't have the details against the explosion. Again, I was not an officer, executive, or a director at the time of the explosion.
How many people were killed in the San Bruno explosion?
My understanding is 8 people were fatally injured.
How many were injured?
I don't recall the specifics of that, but I know there were several others that were injured.
Possibly around 58, I understand. How many homes were destroyed or damaged?
I'm not aware of the specific details. I know more than what any of us would have ever wanted.
So I understand it was about 38 homes were destroyed and 70 or more were damaged. Does that sound about right?
That sounds familiar, Senator.
And this explosion followed an explosion in Rancho Cordova in California in December 2008?
That sounds familiar, yes.
Okay, that's a couple of months after you left.
That's correct.
That one. How many people were killed in the Rancho Cordova explosion?
I believe there was one person that was fatally injured.
Now, The Guardian reports that an investigation conducted by the National Transport Safety Board into the San Bruno explosion revealed that it was caused by two main factors: a poorly welded pipe section installed in 1956, and second, an inadequate pipeline integrity management program which failed to detect and repair or remove the defective pipe section. You familiar with that?
I have read many of the same reports as you have, Senator. Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Now, does Pacific Gas and Electric Company dispute these findings of the National Transport Safety Board?
Again, I think any questions about PG&E's position should be referred to the PG&E General Counsel and the defense attorneys behind that case. I don't speak for PG&E or represent them, as I no longer work at that company.
I might come back to that one about whether or not that's in dispute by the company or not.
All right.
The NTSB report into the San Bruno explosion noted, and I quote, "Several deficiencies revealed by the National Transportation Safety Board investigation into San Bruno, such as PG&E's poor quality control during the pipe installation and inadequate emergency response, were factors in the 2008 explosion of PG&E gas pipeline in Rancho Cordova, California." Are you aware of that finding?
Again, Senator, only from what I have read as well. I have no inside information around anything other than the same thing that's publicly available to you.
Has the company admitted liability for the San Bruno explosion?
I don't believe so.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I'm not aware of any statements that they've made to that effect.
Well, I understand that PG&E states in its 2012 Federal Energy Regulatory Commission filing that, quote, "The utility has publicly stated that it is liable for the San Bruno accident and will take financial responsibility to compensate all of the victims for the injuries they suffered as a result of the accident."
That
So
is
that would
my
be a
understanding.
yes.
That is my
I
understanding
guess.
as well, and I'm glad they did do that, Senator.
Now, I understand that on the 17th of April 2012, Pacific Gas paid $70 million American dollars to the City of San Bruno in restitution to aid the community's recovery. Is that correct?
I cannot validate the numbers, Senator. That if you're reading about that, then I'll trust that that is accurate.
And this $70 million was in addition to $50 million that the company paid to the City of San Bruno for infrastructure repairs and other city expenses tied to the accident. Does that sound correct?
It could be, Senator.
Now, I understand that from a PG&E regulatory filing that approximately 140 lawsuits involving third-party claims for personal injury and property damage, including 2 class action lawsuits, had been filed against PG&E Corporation and the utility in connection with the San Bruno accident on behalf of approximately 450 plaintiffs. The lawsuits seek compensation for personal injury and property damage and other relief, including punitive damages. Does that sound familiar? Is that correct?
I'm not aware of all of those details, Senator.
And PG&E has settled these claims?
They may have, Senator. I'm not aware.
My information indicates that PG&E has settled all but 2 of the third-party lawsuits and class actions for $565 million. You're not familiar with that?
No, I'm not, Senator.
To your knowledge, what's the status of the 2 outstanding lawsuits?
There's the 2 outstanding.
I understand it's the case. There's 2 outstanding.
Well, there is the derivative class action suit that I mentioned that a judge has joined all the plaintiffs that have come together. That is the only suit that I am named as party to. As I understand it, there is a different U.S. government case against the company, but there are no officers or directors named in that case.
I'll get to that.
All right. And so if those are the 2 suits that you're referring to.
Okay. How would you characterise the duty of care owed by a CEO and president to their employing corporation and shareholders?
I think the CEO should take responsibility and make sure that that duty and care is provided by everybody.
So it's one of the most important priorities.
It's among the high priorities of the company, absolutely, the safety and duty and care of employees and the communities that we serve.
I was talking about not just the local community, but the employing corporation and the shareholders.
Well, of course, if it's an investment that is made into a company and the board has asked the CEO to operate and manage the day-to-day activities of the company, that CEO should look at that investment as though it's their own money and take proper duty and care.
So is it correct to say that a CEO and president of a corporation should, amongst other duties, ensure that the corporation is complying with relevant laws and regulations, including by ensuring that appropriate reporting and information systems are in place to check for failures to comply with relevant laws and regulations?
I think that sounds reasonable of the expectations of a CEO, yes.
And does this duty of care include ensuring there is an adequate budget and staff expertise to safely operate and maintain company assets?
That seems reasonable, Senator, yes.
Now, I'd like to talk about the inadequate pipeline integrity program at Pacific Gas, which the NTSB found had failed to detect, repair or remove the defective pipe section, which caused the explosion. Subsequent investigations were conducted into this program by the California Public Utilities Commission. Are you familiar with them?
I am, yes.
In January 2012, 2 reports were released: an independent audit report conducted by Overland Consulting and a staff report. I'm assuming that's the staff of the Utilities Commission, not the staff of PG&E. Are you familiar with either of those reports?
No, I'm not.
Now, a key finding of the independent audit report was that, and I quote, gas safety funding was heavily constrained in the 2008, 2009 and 2010 budget process. Integrity management and maintenance project budgets were viewed as discretionary funding that could be reduced to meet the overall budget targets set by executive management. Now, for some of that period, you were the executive management. Is that correct?
For the 2006 to 2008, I was president for the first year and CEO for the second year.
So the report concludes that the low priority the company gave to pipeline safety during the 3 years leading up to the San Bruno blast was, quote, well outside industry practice, even during times of corporate austerity programs. Managing a gas system to the brink of regulatory non-compliance and accepted an elevated risk of system failures is not industry practice. Are you familiar with the findings of the independent audit report?
No, I'm not familiar with the details, Senator.
The audit report also says, and I quote, the planning documentation reviewed by Overland does not contain many references to significant budget constraints prior to 2007. GT&S was under significant pressure to reduce expenses in 2008, 9 and 10, and the budget documentation for these years shows significant resource constraints directly impacting pipeline safety funding. It goes on to say, actual 2008 integrity management spending was 35% below the initial budget request that GT&S submitted to the Finance Department. Actual 2008 maintenance spending was 21% below the initial request. As CEO of the company, what role did you have to ensure that the budget was adequate to safely operate and maintain the company assets?
Senator, as I mentioned in my opening statements, this is a case that is before the U.S. courts, and there is much privileged information that would be against my responsibility and duty to that company, the fellow directors and officers, to discuss it any further than what I have in the opening statement.
Are you disagreeing with the audit report?
I've not taken a position on the audit report at all. I'm just, again, explaining that this is a case before the U.S. courts, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on it.
But the company's accepted responsibility for the explosions.
That may be the case. Again, I was not a part of that decision.
We discussed it earlier. I read you some quotes earlier.
Yes, I heard you. Yes, Senator.
Did you approve the 2008 budget?
Senator, again, this is a case that's before the U.S. courts, and
Sorry,
it would be
you were the
inappropriate
CEO
for me
of the company
I
in the
was,
preparation of the 2008 budget. I'm just asking, did you approve the budget?
Senator, I would love to be able to share with you any detail that you want. I know this is an important matter for you as you think about the safety of our communities, our employees at NBN, and you'd like to know more of what happened. And I would like to share as much with you as I could.
I'm just asking, well, did you comply with the requirements that CEOs have to sign off on their budgets?
Senator,
It'd be part of the corporate law, wouldn't it?
Senator, I do not want to frustrate you. I would love to tell you as much detail as I'm allowed, but again, this is a matter before the U.S. courts. And
Yes, Senator Xenophon.
Under the Parliamentary Privileges Act, anything said in this place can't be used in any court proceedings. I'm not sure whether it extends to any extraterritorial, any courts outside this jurisdiction or not, but it might be useful to get a ruling on that. That might clear the air in respect to that. Sorry, Senator Conroy.
Yep.
Chair, just on the
Yeah,
point.
Minister, look, I do have
Just
some
on the point of order,
reservations with your
Chair.
point of order. Go ahead, Minister.
Just on the point of order, I think we do need to be very mindful of the fact that there are legal proceedings in relation to some of these matters in the United States, and I think it is, apart from anything else, good practice for the Senate and its committees to be mindful of legal action in other jurisdictions.
Yeah. If I could just on the point of order.
Yes, Senator Conroy.
I'm mindful of the points that have been made. There was ongoing legal action in the US about Alcatel-Lucent, and in September 2011, I think you might have been present, Senator Williams. I will check the Hansard to confirm that, but Senators Abetz, Senators Birmingham and another senator conducted extensive questioning of Mr Quigley in the same circumstance, and the chair didn't attempt to constrain in any way the questioning of Mr Quigley while there was an ongoing legal matter in the United States.
And did Mr Quigley reserve some of his answers because of that?
I'm not...
Well, I'm going to make a decision,
I'm
Mr
not
Morrow. I'll
quibbling.
leave it for you because I am concerned about statements.
I'm sorry, Chair.
I've just sort
Point
of,
of
well,
order,
I
Chair.
may sort of seek advice from the clerk because the secretary has informed me.
The point is a discrete one. The point is under the Parliamentary Privileges Act. Nothing that is said here can affect proceedings in an Australian court, whether there is by virtue of any agreement with the United States that would also apply there. I'm not sure, but it might be useful to know that.
But we have had advice, I think, recently in committees that these things don't apply extraterritorially. So I think it's highly unlikely that it would.
Well, I thought I'd ask.
Yeah. No, I mean, if I could just make it clear, and you weren't with us at this time,
I'm just
Senator.
taking some advice because you're a lawyer and some others might. I'm not.
I don't pretend I am.
You're a bush lawyer, Chair.
I'm seeking some advice, Senator Xenophon.
I'm also a lawyer, Nick, but some would still refer to me as a bush lawyer, so I don't know.
I get referred to much worse, Senator.
I think many of us do.
Your point of order is justified, Senator Xenophon. The advice I've got to is Australian parliamentary privilege does not apply over in the United States. However, I may seek further.
So it does not apply.
No, what I'm saying, what is said in here cannot be used in the court.
Here or overseas?
Here, overseas especially.
Sorry.
We've got our wires crossed here.
Are they copper wires?
Yep.
Or fibre optic wires?
Five of these ones.
Vectoring will fix it.
You're just going to get a ruling from the Deputy Clerk, Senator Xenophon, on this issue, because this is very sensitive and I don't want to do anything that may hinder anything whatsoever.
Could I just assist?
No, I'm going to get a ruling from the Deputy Clerk.
No, I just want to go to the precedent. That
You
I
are not a
referred to.
Deputy Clerk, Senator.
No, but I just wanted
Conroy.
to add for the assistance of the clerk, during the budget estimates hearing on the 16th of June, as I mentioned, Senators Birmingham, Betts and MacDonald questioned Mr Quigley for almost 4 hours on the Altel-Lucent matter, a live matter, and during his opening statement of the budget estimates hearing on the... I'm almost finished, it won't take a sec. On the 16th of 2011, Mr Quigley noted that I accept completely that these are areas of legitimate interest and inquiry, and I think Mr Morrow said much the same. So I was just to give you the historical record of what happened previously. I'm happy to. Do we want to adjourn? Shall I keep going, or do you want me to
Chair,
adjourn?
could I just... Sorry, no, I'm not trying to halt your flow, Senator Conroy, but just finally on the point of order and on your consideration, I think it's very wise to get advice from the Deputy Clerk, but I would just make the point that in the end, matters of sub judice are always a matter for either committees or the Senate as a whole to consider. So that should be kept in mind, that in the end, committees and the Senate make these judgments.
Chair,
Yes, Minister?
just on the point of order, it may assist just in Odges in Chapter 17, Odges Australian Senate Practice. It does make the point that Australian laws cannot protect people in other jurisdictions. Australian laws, unless there's an agreement with a particular country, do not bind another nation. The laws of that nation bind that nation.
Chair, and
No, hang on a minute. Thank you, Minister Fifield, because, as you said, what happens here in parliamentary privilege does not protect them overseas, correct? If that's the case, I'll rule it. You can be reserved, Mr Morrow, in what you say and not hinder yourself in any way whatsoever. Continue, Senator Conroy.
No, thanks. I'm not seeking to press. I haven't attempted at any stage to press Mr Morrow on any answers, so I happily accept.
Mr Morrow to see that he is protected.
Yep. I was just wondering...
Through the Senate estimates process.
I was just wondering, given the documents that I've been referring to and reading to, which you indicated you weren't aware of, how comprehensive was the briefing that you gave Mr Turnbull, Mr Clark, the Secretary of the Department, and the NBN board?
I had informed the government and the board of directors that there was this legal case with the company PG&E. They then took it upon themselves to investigate matters beyond that. I was asked a few follow-up questions for clarity, and that's as much as I know, Senator.
Okay, so you didn't draw to the attention of Mr Turnbull or the board the items in the findings?
I mentioned in the recruitment process that there was a case pending that had me named and explained to them what that case was and where to go to get further information about it.
Okay. Now, I was just asking, and I'm not sure that this can be used in a court case against you, so I'm surprised at your reluctance to answer whether you, as the CEO and President, approved the 2008 budget for the company.
Again,
It'd be a matter of public record, I'm assuming. There would be, I mean, I could go and look up the annual reports on a database over there, and I'm sure your name is signed on the bottom of them, so I don't know that it could possibly prejudice you by you admitting that you approved the 2008 budget.
Senator, as I respect the laws of Australia, I also respect the laws of the United States, and I would ask that you honour the ruling made by the chair of the committee, as I cannot comment any further on that particular case.
But I'm assuming you complied with the laws that require the CEO and the board to approve the...
Point of order, Senator
I
Selja.
think Mr Morrow's clearly answered this question, and he is now being pressed to try and answer it in a different way.
Pressing has a different term in Parliament. Pressing means I seek the committee to press.
Either way, I would put it to you, Chair, that Mr Morrow has made it very clear his reservations. He's said how he's going to answer this question. I don't see that he can be badgered by Senator Conroy further. It is what it is. I've
made it clear to Mr Morrow to see that when he does answer questions, he does protect himself and what his conscience tells me about what is happening overseas. Continue your questioning, Senator Conroy.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I said, I'm assuming it's a legal requirement of the United States that the President, the Board and the CEO of a company sign off on its annual budget.
I think that's a fair assumption to make, Senator.
Which would mean that you would have signed off on the 2008 budget, unless you broke the corporate law, which I'm not in for a moment alleging.
And again, I won't comment on anything to do during that period of time with that case.
Mr Fifield, did the Minister... Oh, sorry, Senator, apologies, Senator Fifield. Did the Minister seek any further information about the issues that Mr Morrow raised? I appreciate I have to take that on notice, but I'm happy for you to take it on notice.
Sure, I will take that on notice, Senator.
Mr Morrow, are you aware if the board sought any further information?
I am aware that there was a contact made with the General Counsel of PG&E.
Okay, great. No, thank you. So we've agreed legally you're required to approve the 2008 annual budget.
I'm sorry, I did not agree with that.
I said we've agreed that under American law, the board and the CEO of a company has to approve its annual budget.
I'm not aware that it's law, but it is common practice.
Okay, I can happily accept that, but you're not prepared to say to the committee whether you approved, in your capacity as CEO and President, the 2008 budget.
I must refrain from commenting on that case, Senator.
Okay. Now, Mr Morrow, were you as CEO of the company in 2007 and 8 responsible for any of the cost cutting to the safety budget that the California Public Utilities Commission asserts contributed to the San Bruno explosion?
Again, Senator, I won't comment about anything that could impact that case, and I believe that would.
I'm just quoting from the California Public Utilities Commission. It's a public document. It's on the public record. But you don't want to rebut that?
Again, Senator, I don't want to frustrate you. I would like to be able to provide all the information to you that you're requesting. As this is a matter before the U.S. courts, I must refrain at this point in time.
Is Pacific Gas and Electricity Company a regulated utility within our, and I'm talking about our as in Australian, understanding of the term?
There are similarities, yes, Senator.
So that is, for instance, the rate of return and therefore the amount it is allowed to recover from its customers is set by the relevant regulator?
That is correct, yes.
In much the same way that the ACCC has oversight of the amount the NBN Co is able to recover from its wholesale customers.
That may be the case. Again, I've learned much about...
Probably haven't dealt with them quite enough yet. I think you'll discover it is. The independent audit states, and I quote, PG&E's revenues were $430 million higher than the amounts needed to earn the authorised return during the 12-year study period. That's 1999 to 2010, so that's not all of your period. The surplus revenues averaged $36 million a year. Are you aware of that finding?
Again, Senator, I must refrain from commenting about anything that could affect that case.
I just asked you if you're aware of the finding of the independent audit. Didn't ask you to comment on it, I just asked you if you were aware of it.
Again, I had left the company in August of 2008, and I'm not privy to any particular information that was made available to it since then.
It's a public document, so I'm just wondering if you're aware of the public document.
I've been busy with other things. I haven't spent time reading those things.
So I was just wondering if you explained to the committee what that meant in practice. Is this report alleging that the regulator approved certain rate recovery amounts for investment into gas pipeline safety? Is that how it works? That's a generic question, not a specific question. I'm just trying to understand how it worked.
I understand, and I thank you for clarifying that, but I'm not aware of any of the specific details to be able to help you with that question.
Because I'm trying to understand whether the report is alleging that Pacific Gas collected more from its ratepayers than it invested in the network. So I'm just trying to understand what the context of that finding by the independent audit was.
No, I'm not aware.
Okay. So the audit report indicates that surplus revenues, and by that I mean monies collected from ratepayers for safety investments, which were not spent on safety investments, was $51 million in 2007 and about $46 million in 2008 while you were the CEO. Is that your recollection?
Again, Senator, I would not comment on anything within that case for reasons explained earlier.
But you're not disputing you're not disputing the findings of the audit?
I'm not commenting on that question or anything again to do with that case.
We have an opportunity to rebut it if you want to.
Thank you for the opportunity.
The audit report states, and I quote, PG&E could have used the surplus revenues at least in part to improve gas safety. Instead, PG&E chose to use the surplus revenues for general corporate purposes. And according to the article on Friday, the Utilities Commission report alleges that $100 million was diverted to shareholder returns and bonuses for management. Are you able to provide any information on the purposes to which this money was redirected while you were CEO?
Again, Senator, I'm refraining from comment on anything that could impact that particular case.
So it's $100 million diverted to shareholder returns and bonuses for management, and you don't want to comment?
Yes, Senator, I will not comment.
Okay. The staff report from the Utilities Commission noted that in the 3 years leading up to the San Bruno explosion, and you were in charge for some period of that time, the company spent $56 million a year on an incentive plan for executives and non-employee directors, including stock awards, performance shares and deferred compensation. And the staff report, that's the Commission staff report, not PG&E staff report, and it's a quote, a cursory review reveals that a significant proportion, in the millions, has been awarded to the CEO of the parent company, Mr Darby. Are you familiar with him?
I know Mr Darby, yes.
Additional significant individual awards in the hundreds of thousands has been provided to high-level employees. Out of 55 awardees on one list of grants, just 3 have a title or a department that reflects natural gas division work. And it goes on to say, this is important because the independent review panel notes that PG&E company includes a number of individuals in top management with little or no previous experience in the natural gas industry and or no direct operating experience. The main training experience and professional careers of many in PGE's top management are in telecommunications, finance and law, and they have not had operating roles where they could develop the requisite expertise in the reliability and safety aspects of a major gas or electric utility. Are you familiar with this finding?
Again, Senator, I'm not familiar with the details and cannot comment on the case for the reasons given earlier.
So can I just confirm?
There seems to be now a bit of a persistent line of questioning that is all going to what Mr Morrow has said.
I'm entitled to ask questions.
Is the subject of court proceedings in the United States. Now, Mr Morrow has made it very clear that he's not going to answer questions about that, and so I would ask you to rule in terms of whether or not this line of questioning should end, and perhaps Mr Conroy can Senator Conroy
on the point of order. Don't worry about it, Senator Conroy. You can continue your question. And I've left to the liberty of Mr Morrow how he answers those questions. If he refused to answer those questions, that's up to Mr Morrow. If you want to continue down this road and take up more time, that's your prerogative, that's your privilege. But
I thank you for your...
Mr Morrow, I repeat to you, I'll leave it to your judgment on whether you decide to answer questions or not, because I do not want trouble brewing out of this committee hearing.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I would again make the point that, as I've mentioned, Senators Birmingham, Betts and McDonald questioned Mr Quigley for almost 4 hours on the Alcatel-Lucent matter at budget estimates hearing, but I appreciate your ruling. So can I just confirm, Mr Morrow, you didn't have any direct operating experience prior to joining Pacific Gas and Electric Company in the reliability and safety aspects of a major gas or electric utility operation?
Senator, that's a matter that I think would impact that case and therefore cannot answer.
Could you identify any work you did previously in major gas or electricity utility operations?
Again,
just from your CV, I didn't see it anyway, that was all. So I'm not being pejorative when I ask that, I'm just, from your CV, it doesn't read that you've got any.
Again, Senator, I think that's an issue that would relate to this case and therefore I would not answer.
So, as I think we've discussed earlier, you were hired principally for your experience as a turnaround specialist.
Yes.
I think you acknowledged that at the beginning.
Others have written about, not me boasting it myself.
No, I wasn't suggesting you had given yourself that moniker.
Right.
So I understand that on the 6th of May 2013, the California Public Utilities Commission recommended a penalty of $2.25 billion against the company for the San Bruno explosion. If adopted by the Commission, this would be the largest penalty ever assessed to a utility company. Are you aware of that?
Again, matters affecting the case, I will refrain from answering.
No, I'm just asking if you're aware of that.
Senator, at this point, again, I think it's prudent of me to stay away from any issues that would relate to in any way the particular cases that we've referenced in my opening statement.
To your knowledge, has the California Public Utilities Commission finalised the penalty to be brought against Pacific Gas and Electric Co?
Again, Senator, my same response.
Now, I understand that on the 1st of April 2014, after a 3-year investigation, a federal grand jury for the Northern District of California returned an indictment charging Pacific Gas and Electricity Company with 12 separate criminal violations of the Natural Gas Pipeline Safety Act of 1968. Is that correct?
I'm
assuming that's the case you're referring to when you say you're involved in the case and you can't comment.
If it suits, Senator, and at the respect of the committee, in these questions that I feel does relate to the case that would in any way influence or change the court of law rights in the U.S., I will just comment as no comment to make this easier. And for that question, I would offer no comment.
I'm just asking whether it's a fact that something's been filed in court like an indictment.
No comment.
You can't comment about whether a fact is the case?
Senator Conroy?
It's a fact that this indictment's been handed down. You can't comment on that?
Again, no comment.
To confirm you know about it.
Senator, with respect, I want to be very careful. I take law very serious, and the matters in the U.S. are something that I must respect, and therefore I can offer no comment.
Could you advise the committee how the company is pled to these charges?
No comment.
I understand it's not guilty.
Again, no comment.
Now, The Guardian reports that an NBN spokesman said that you had not been called to give evidence in the grand jury proceedings, and whether or not this occurs as a matter for the US courts. That's a little bit broader than no comment.
That would be a correct statement. I've not been asked to give any evidence.
Yeah, it would be a correct statement that the indictment was handed down too, but you wanted to say no comment on that.
I'm happy to say no comment if you'd prefer me to be consistent.
No, I'm just I think that poor Mr. Scholl just gets sent out with these lines. This poor bloke gets sent out with these lines and then gets ditched. That's the third time. It's just like...
I do want you to know I'm listening to your questions, Senator.
I hope you're...
I thought it was a good icebreaker, Senator.
Yeah, no, I thought, seriously, you've got to give him danger money for his job. First dealing with Steve Ellis, then being ditched 3 times in public. Now, do you expect that you'll be called to testify as part of these proceedings?
No comment.
Now, I understand that you are named personally in a derivative shareholder suit alleging that, and I quote, Defendant William T. Morrow was an officer of Public Gas and Electric Company during a period of time when PG&E was grossly underspending on operational and process safety, creating a situation where a catastrophic incident was not only possible but highly likely. Defendant Morrow, as an officer and director of the company, was responsible for implementing a risk management system and ensuring that there was an adequate budget and staff expertise to safely operate and maintain the network. Defendant Morrow allowed the company to make safety a low priority in comparison to profits, and Defendant Morrow is therefore liable for breach of his fiduciary duties to the company. Are you familiar with that?
No comment, Senator.
You can't acknowledge that you're familiar with it?
No comment, Senator.
On water. This suit was filed in the San Mateo County Court in September last year by 3 plaintiffs who are all shareholders of PG&E. Is that correct?
No comment, Senator.
What is the current status of this proceeding?
No comment, Senator.
Has another derivative shareholder suit recently been launched against the leadership of Pacific Gas, including yourself, Mr. Morrow?
No comment, Senator.
I understand it was filed on behalf of another plaintiff last month on the 25th of April 2014 in the Superior Court of the State of California in and for the County of San Mateo. What's the current status of that proceeding?
No comment, Senator.
Sorry, Mr. Morrow's very quietly spoken, so I'm just having trouble hearing his answers.
Warning your colleague, Senator Urquhart, how you're taking up so much time there. Do not whinge to me when your time has expired.
At 11 o'clock tonight. Now, according to the Guardian article from Friday, a spokesman for the minister said the government had been made fully aware of the various allegations surrounding your period at PG&E. Government sources have told The Guardian that, quote, the Cabinet was entirely aware of the history at the time of Mr Morrow's appointment to NBN Co. Exactly, and I think you have indicated, but how broad was the advice you gave to Mr Turnbull that the Cabinet then used to consider your appointment? How much depth? Initially, I asked you if you knew of these reports, and you said you didn't. Yes. So I'm just trying to understand.
I am aware that there is a derivative lawsuit that has named the company, me, and 19 others. I shared that information with the board and the governor at the time we were in discussions for the CEO job.
Okay. Did you advise the Minister of the allegations that the explosions occurred as a result of budget cuts while you were CEO? I'm saying that was the allegation, so did you advise the Minister that that was the allegation?
I advised the Minister of my name being on the list of defendants, is all that I advised.
So you didn't advise the Minister that there were allegations that the explosions occurred as a result of budget cuts and people died?
No, I believe, though, that the Minister and the board looked into what the allegations were.
I think you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Now, because there's a number of different suits, I'm not trying to draw you out on any of them, but did you advise the Minister about both the suit against the company and also the derivative shareholders? I'm just trying to, because there's 2 different things happening and a third now that's come along, which is roughly the same. But
I do believe I did mention that there was a case that was filed against the company and a separate case that was filed that included the company and my name.
Did you update him when the most recent one was filed?
Which most recent one? Are you
The one on 25th of April, just a few days ago, or a month ago.
Sorry, can you be more specific?
25th of April 2014. This was Mr Marini's. It was a second derivative shareholder suit, I understand.
No,
Have you updated the Minister and the Board?
The Minister is now aware of that particular case, but I did not feel it was a need to notify the government or the Board because that case was joined by a judge that it is the same basic allegations that's made against myself, 19 others, and the company.
Okay, thanks. Do you expect that these proceedings and the criminal indictments against the company to which you may be called to testify will interfere with your ability to run NBN Co?
I do not believe any of this will be an issue for me running NBN Co and serving the government and the Australian taxpayers.
Now, The Guardian also reported that NBN Co said there had been full disclosure to the government. Mr Morrow openly canvassed these matters with both the Board and the government during the recruitment process. And I think that's what you're indicating today.
That is correct.
Yeah. Now, is the government aware that Mr Bradley Whitcomb, your new Head of Transformation and Corporate Culture at NBN Co, was also with you at Pacific Gas and Electric Company between 06 and 08?
I don't know whether the Governor was made aware, but the Board certainly was made aware by Mr Whitcomb's background and CV.
Now, I've twice now requested, and I'm confused about your understanding of the process, when parliamentary committees ask for officers of GBEs to come, it's not an option unless they've genuinely got another engagement. I've asked twice for Mr Whitcomb to attend parliamentary hearings, and at neither time, with no explanation, has he been in attendance. He's not with you today, is he?
No, he's not here, Senator.
Why isn't Mr Whitcomb responding to requests from the parliamentary committee for his attendance?
I can assure you, Senator, there is no games being played, that he will be before you and the Senate in the future hearings. He has just started with the company. There were several other commitments. The request for his name was fairly late, and we could not change his commitment. But again, I assure you he will be in front of you.
So that's the second time, so it's just wanted to be clear. You understand the process? It's not optional who comes. I mean, if we invited 20 people, I accept an answer that, hey, we're trying to run a company. That'd be absurd. But if we're trying to identify key individuals with key responsibilities in the company.
Senator Conroy, could I just clarify on that? When we had our meeting about witnesses that was not raised in the committee, on the 22nd of May, Senator Urquhart did make requests to me that had not gone through the committee. When looking at special witnesses or appointing a specific witness to come along, process has normally been it's gone through the Senate chamber. It has never been a case of a committee.
All I'd say to you, after 18 years attending Senate estimates on both sides of the both sides, I'm not familiar
hear me
with
out,
what you're
please.
describing.
The Secretary did contact NBN and said there are these issues that wish to be answered, and the response was we'll do all we can except for commercial in confidence. So that is the situation as far as the witnesses go.
I'm accepting Mr Morrow's explanation that he's tied up.
I'm just clarifying to you what happened in the committee when organising
I'm talking
these
about two
Senate
different
estimates,
committees.
okay? Yeah, we're talking about the witnesses that are coming along.
I was referring to two different committees, this one and another one.
I just want to clarify the witnesses of this committee that come along.
the government's...
As far as these Senate estimates go, budget estimates go, okay?
If I could just... I am confused about the process that was introduced recently. I'm not aware that government majorities say yes or no and have to approve witnesses to be invited to attend estimates. If that's a new process you've introduced...
Continue your question.
If that's a new process you've introduced, if you could let us know, but I'm not aware after 18 years in the Parliament that that's the case.
You think you would learn in that time?
Well, perhaps it's the Chair that has introduced something new. But I'll move on.
I sought good advice.
I'll move on.
Much better advice than you could give.
No, requesting is one thing. Directing would have to go through the floor, but requesting... is entirely a different process.
As I said,
but I'll move on.
Raised to me personally
but I'll
on
move
the
on.
22nd of May. Please move on.
Thank you. Now, Mr Whitcomb, when did he start at PG&E?
I can't recall the specific date, but I think it's in the last several weeks.
No, I said PG&E.
Oh, at PG&E, sorry.
Was it the day after you started or the same day?
No, I don't recall the specifics, Senator.
Where was he before PG&E?
He was at a company, I believe, called Silver Springs.
That's not where you were, though, was it?
No, that's correct.
So he joined you at PG&E. He seems to have followed you around the world a little bit.
Mr. Whitcomb and I...
He followed you to Vodafone, I understand.
I'm sorry?
He followed you to Vodafone,
Yes.
both overseas and here in Australia?
No, we had both worked for the same company before. There was no following prior.
So which other companies had you jointly worked together at?
We worked together at Vodafone, at Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and here at NBN.
What was Mr. Whitcomb's role at PG&E?
Energy conservation and marketing, I believe.
Okay. And what's Mr. Whitcomb's qualification?
I don't have his CV here in front of me, but he is a chartered accountant. He is an MBA graduate. He has done various functions that range from sales to marketing to turnaround specialist. He's run transformation at multiple different companies. He has worked with people on individual personnel development. He's worked on cultural shift and change. And he has worked in many international companies with a broad background, all of which he has been tremendously successful at.
Could he have been one of the people being referred to by the California Public Utilities Authority as not having any experience in the actual field of gas and electricity utilities?
Again, Senator, I can't comment on.
I'm just asking you if he could be one of them, not that he is. I have no idea if he is.
I can't comment.
Now, I wanted to refer again to the suit filed in the San Mateo County Court in September last year by 3 plaintiffs. I understand that, among other things, the suit is seeking the return of all executive bonuses paid during the period PG&E was cutting its safety budget. And I understand the second derivative lawsuit filed by Mr. Marini is seeking the same thing. You familiar with that?
Again, I can't comment.
So they're calling on you to return your, and I name you, so I can say you in this case, they're calling on you to return your executive bonuses. That's what they're asking back from you. That's just reading from their lawsuit. That's correct?
No, I can't comment.
Now, The Guardian reports that you were paid $3.8 million in 2007 and $4.48 million in 2008 in wages, benefits and stock, according to regulatory filings. Is this correct?
Again, I can't comment on anything that
You
may
can't
affect
comment
the
on
case.
what your salary was publicly stated as.
If I fear that it would impact that case, I'm sorry, Senator, I won't comment.
How could identifying your salary, which is on the public record, compromise your case?
Again, Senator, I can't comment.
Now, these regulatory filings indicate that you were paid a salary of $625,000 in 2007 and $517,500 in 2008. Is that correct?
Again, Senator, I can't comment.
As I said, these are the regulatory filings that the company made. So I was just hoping you could confirm that there wasn't any inaccuracy in that. So roughly $3 million a year, the difference between your total remuneration and your salary, which was $3.1 million in 2000 and $3.9 million in 2008, is made up of bonus payments and stock awards. That's usually described as at risk. I don't know if that's a term that the US use in the same way we do. So you had that 3.1 million, 3.9 made up of bonuses, roughly 3 million when you do the maths on your basic salary. That's factually right. I'm trying not to mislead you by using a phrase that you may not be absolutely familiar with. So is that how you would describe it? Sorry, is that how you would describe that sort of remuneration package in the US, where you've got a base salary plus an at-risk? Is that a normal phrasing? Just so genuinely I'm not misleading you about. So we're talking generically, completely separate from you. Is that how, if I was describing it, is that how I'd describe it, or is there a different phrase you'd use?
Senator, I'm confused. I'm sorry. As you know, I cannot comment on any specifics around PG&E, but if you're asking me about the salary structure in the United
salary
States,
structure generic.
Yeah, and could you ask your question?
I'm just
again?
asking whether so you get a base salary, and then there's what we term in Australia as your salaries at risk or bonuses
Yes.
based on performance. So at
Very
risk is a
similar.
phrase that we use in Australia. So I'm just seeking to make sure that we're having a conversation based on a common understanding.
That's fair. Happy to talk to you about this all day long, night long.
That language.
No, it's just
some parts of the community might use.
None of my salaries at risk,
I see.
except from the Australian public every 3 or 6 years.
Well, the general U.S. construct, Senator, if I could help you with, is a base compensation level. There is a short-term incentive, which is at risk depending on the performance of the company, and then there's typically a long-term incentive that most of the time is tied to the shareholder returns. So there's 3 factors. The latter 2 are what I believe you're referring to as pay at risk, much like the executives of NBN have a certain percentage of their pay at risk.
Have you repaid any of the bonuses you received?
At PG&E, are you asking? Again, I would refrain from commenting anything about PG&E.
I was asking whether you've paid any money back.
I understand, Senator, and I'm simply just saying I can't comment about anything about PG&E.
Okay. Now, just in terms of your salary structure at NBN Co, and this is all public, and the committee's entitled to ask. It's probably the first time you've been through this, but the committee's entitled to know what you get paid, what your bonuses are, that sort of stuff. What's your salary package at the moment? I'm coming because I want to understand whether there's a bonus component to it.
Right.
I'm happy for the CFO to ask or
Well,
to
no.
answer if it makes it easier.
Normally, as you know, all the disclosures we're required to make about
Yes, no, but this is a
salaries
Senate
are
parliamentary
in the annual
inquiry.
report.
So this is a Senate committee, so we're entitled to ask and you're entitled to answer. You're not entitled to say no.
Order. The committee will break for 1 hour for dinner. Thank you. Return at 7:30. Resume, and sorry for the delay. We had to have some meetings and we did clarify some things from the clerk and all is good. Senator Conroy, you have about 10 minutes before I go to other senators, please.
I just wanted to follow up on the question I was asking. As you're aware, everyone well knew Mr Quigley's salary from almost day one. It's not a secret and it was available to the committee whenever anyone asked. I'm seeking to establish his salary to understand if he's being paid on a salary plus bonus circumstances, and the committee, if you don't answer, will seek to press, which is available to the committee. So I was wondering if you could indicate his salary.
Senator, my understanding is that in many circumstances the salaries of individuals aren't
Mr Quigley's was $2 million. It was asked and answered.
But I'm happy to take it on notice.
There is no need for it to be taken on notice. The man who can answer the question is sitting right there.
I've taken it on notice, Senator.
Well, that's a straight-up abuse of parliamentary process and demeans the committee.
Senator Conroy, the Minister said he'll take it on notice.
Mr Quigley's salary was $2 million. It was well known and he took no bonuses.
But my understanding is that it will certainly, the remuneration of the senior executive staff will be in the annual report, but I have taken your question on notice, Senator.
And is there a component at risk? Do we use the phrase that we use, Mr Morrow? Is it all salary, as Mr Quigley's was, $2 million, or is there salary plus bonus?
I'd have to take that on notice. I don't have the details with me of Mr Morrow.
You're the Chief Financial Officer. You actually signed the cheque.
No, I understand that, but I don't have the details with me here today. So
no, I asked whether there was salary plus bonus.
That's the normal arrangement for senior executives, yes.
No, I appreciate that others do, and we'll get to that when we get to that, but I'm asking for you to confirm a simple fact, not even an amount. So has Mr Morrow got a package that includes remuneration and at risk?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. Now, Mr Morrow, you mentioned you went to Clearwire after...
After...
Was it Clearwire?
Gas and electric.
After Pacific Gas, yep. That was a WiMAX company, is that right?
It was a 4G wireless...
Yeah, we call it WiMAX rather than 4G for obvious reasons over here.
Yeah. But yes, Senator, to clarify, it had WiMAX technology on it, and we also implemented LTE technology on it as well.
Yeah. Did you know any of the Australian WiMAX companies? Did you deal with any individuals in Australia?
Vivid? No, not Vivid, sorry.
I think David's right, but keep going. You might you'll get his last name too.
Yeah, yes. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the gentleman that's the CEO that ran the company.
In Australia?
Yes.
David Spence?
No. The gentleman that went to Optus after Optus acquired the spectrum.
Okay. There was a range of people that ran it for a while, so it moved around a bit as to who was in charge of it.
What? Mercer, yes.
Yeah,
Martin Mercer,
that's
yes.
Malcolm Mercer, yep. Okay, thank you. Now, how long have I got?
You've got about 6 minutes.
Okay. Now, in brownfields, between the 31st of March and the 25th of May, that's 8 weeks, the last 8 weeks, NBN Co passed 8,599 premises. That's an average of 1,075 per week. I'm just wanting to understand that's correct. Who's in charge of the right, Mr. Aycock? Are those correct figures?
I don't know your figures, Senator. I have in front of me my figures as at the end of March in brownfields premises passed was 340,956, and the last I had, which was the last day I had, which was the 26th of May, it was 365,378. So that's
there's a 1 day difference, so it's possible for there to be a minor difference, but I understand that's a grand total of 8,599.
340 to 365 is 25,000, so we'll have to get our figures lined up.
I'm talking brownfields only.
That's what I'm talking, brownfields.
Okay. So what do you think the 25th of May figure is? 26th of May in your case?
26th of May is 365,378. I can understand. Yes, okay, Senator. I
was about to call up your latest report.
No, that's okay. No, I understand. So the company is now declaring premises premises ready for service, which is when 90% of the FSAM has been filled, as opposed there's been a change in reporting to align with the agreements. My apologies. I understand.
Yeah,
I can see how it can be confusing. So
yeah, no, I'm just going to your website.
Yes, and that number, as I understand it, will be
349,555.
Yes.
Now, so I do remember.
Yes.
You won't.
Okay.
And Mr. Payne might vaguely remember the outrage that was expressed by some people when we included partials previously, when we hadn't fully signed up an FSAM. So can I just be clear? So when you've passed 90, in other words, you haven't passed 100, you're claiming the 100?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So can you just clarify that? I will come back to your numbers on your website.
Yeah, that's okay.
But what is the change in reporting policy?
Okay. The premises are usually declared ready for service or the commencement of the 18 months to disconnection when an FSAM is 90% passed. Mm-hmm. There was a period in time leading up to, I think it was just about 4 or 5 weeks ago, where the decision had been taken to declare them FDA by FDA for a raft of reasons. I wasn't at
that
NBN
one goes back for a long.
But instead of waiting till the FSAM had been completed, they were going.
I'm familiar with the FDA.
FDA by FDA.
Yeah.
Decision because of discussions with both the RSP industry, who were getting somewhat challenged by the fact that small pockets were being released at points in time rather than whole FSAMs, and it was consuming their marketing budgets and, confusing people in areas where, one FDA had been released instead of a whole FSAM. Decisions have been taken to go back to the way the contracts were originally structured, and that we only declare premises passed when the 90% of the FSAM is filled. So that will be the differential between the actual physical premises passed from a construction perspective, which we don't declare because they're not ready for service and RSPs can't sell into them, and the number that we report now on our website, which is those that are ready for service, and so the RSPs can actually sell into them.
So you're going to have to help me here because I'm a little
Yeah,
slow.
no, that's fine.
So I'm trying to understand. You've got 349,000 as of the 25th of May.
Yep. That would be
That's
359,555 that have been opened for the RSPs to sell into.
The previous week you were on 349,017.
That'd be right. We haven't declared any open for sale to the RSPs at this point in time.
And that was the 18th of May.
Yeah.
So on the 25th of May, or the 26th now from the number you're quoting from, you're now saying the number is how many?
Well, our numbers align there. The premises that are ready for service are 349,555.
So help me here. I'm being very slow.
Okay.
How many? Is this figure right or wrong? Because this is the comparison figure of premises passed.
Premises passed, and that's the ones that have physically been passed by our construction teams. The current figure, which isn't declared publicly because it was confusing people, but, to keep the figures
Premises passed is
consistent.
on the website, so it is declared publicly. That's right.
The label, okay. Premises passed and ready for sale. I believe there is an explanatory note on the website.
It just says premises passed A.
What does A?
Refers to homes and businesses passed by the active network, including premises activated and those that can't yet access the service, i.e. service class 0. That's all that's on your website for your 349,555.
That's it. Okay. Well, I can assure you, Senator.
I'm not doubting. I'm just all I've got to work from is the public
what's on the
figures.
website. That's fine, and that's the number now that is ready for service and passed, and that our RSP community can sell
Yes.
services into.
So you've passed 349, and now you're saying you've got a different categorisation, which gives you a higher number.
Yeah. So
Because, as I said, from the 8 weeks on your table here on this website, from the 31st of March to the 21st of May, you've only passed 8,599, and you're telling me you've passed 25,000. So I'm trying to understand what's causing this discrepancy.
okay, what was causing this discrepancy is.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay, no.
hopefully get an answer, and then I'm happy to. I'll come back to it, but I'm happy to break in a second. But finish the answer.
Okay, so let me clarify. We have said on numerous occasions that one of the things that was challenging us was the confusion that was being created by the numbers on our website due to premises passed versus premises that people could actually sell into. The previous number was premises passed on a weekly basis as reported by the construction companies, but not necessarily what our RSP customers could sell into. So the comparative from the frames of reference that you're talking from, and that is construction premises passed as opposed to those available to sell into, is 365,378.
Thank you, Senator.
No, but what I'm confused about, and this is just following, I'm confused that I can understand if the number was less. No, it's not a question, it's a clarification. I can understand if you had less that you're able to sell to than you've passed. Well, my head I'm trying to understand is how you're saying you've got more.
No. And the clarification is that the premises, those that are noted on premises passed on the website are those that are now ready for service for the RSPs to sell into.
Yes, so it's 349.
349,555.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Senator Conroy, and we'll come back to you, no doubt.
We'll come back to it.
I'd like to ask some questions, Mr Adcock. We're on that very issue of about last December. There's something, I'm just these figures plucking them out of my head. There's something like 320,000 residents passed, but something like 70,000 could not be connected to. Is that correct? What was that figure that were included in the premises passed, but they simply, literally could not hook to them?
That's the service class 0, that's known as, and as at December last year, that number was 85,000.
What is it today?
So,
what is it today?
91,000.
91,000.
It's gone up. My goodness.
Because we've passed homes.
After 9 months, it's gone up.
So let's get to that problem. Senator Conroy, I have the call and we gave you a fair run, Senator Conroy. I'll tell you what.
Sorry.
Senator Conroy, we gave you a decent run. We asked you to do the same favour to other senators around this gathering, okay? So what progress has NBN made to design to hook onto those now 90,000 premises that you could not hook on and do when Minister Turnbull told me this late last year? Because they were included in the figures of the previous government. We passed all these premises, but they could not hook to them.
That's so, Senator, I think I'll take your question and try and explain the situation
take your time explaining.
that confronted most of us when we joined NBN Co, and it's now known. The construction processes and the contractual instruments that were in the market were focused on rolling out the distribution network, or the local network distribution network, and as the network rolled down the street without connecting up to the homes, just rolling down the street, that was the proxy for premises passed.
Yep.
And they were broken into, I think it's 4 subcategories. It was service class 0. Service class 0 is where the network rolled past a block of flats or a multi-dwelling unit, and the quantification of what was required in there was unknown, so it was just passed, and the service class was 0, so that people couldn't order services. There was then service class 1, where there was a multi-port, so, and I know Senator Conroy's corrected me before, you could place an order, but what was needed to be done by way of a work order to connect the customer was unknown. There was no lead in, and so whilst there was a multi-port in the street, and we still have service class 1 today, because it takes time to change the contractual environment. So service class 1, a person could place an order, but when the people got there to do the work, they did not know what confronted them to hook up the customer. When a lead-in was done and a connection device was put on the side of the house, that would be service class 2. At that point in time, there is a known scope of work to actually connect an end user. So if an end user orders a service through their retail service provider, and there is a box on the side of the house, NBN's obligation is to go out and get the cable inside the house, put the termination device inside the house and power it up, and that is then known as service class 3, at which point in time a service provider can plug in a gateway and turn on broadband services to the customer. The way the contracts are structured, and they're under the process of being changed at the moment, this year, this calendar year, of all the premises that have been declared ready for service, and that is the 90% of the network homes have been passed in an area, 31% at the time of declaring ready for service were service class 0. I think 65% have been service class 1, so that's 96% of the premises. Either you cannot service or have no lead-in at the time they're declared ready for service and the 18-month clock starts. And so that's the big issue for NBN to address at the moment. We're putting in place steps to address that because that's what's driving angst in the community as the activation times are delayed. Does that answer the question?
It does. Are you, who's the expert on the proposed satellites to be launched? Who's Mr. Russo? Mr. Russo?
Senator?
In the opening statement of Mr. Morrow, that may be delayed to 2016, is that correct? The satellites?
The launch of the service, yes.
The launch of service.
The launch of the service, not the launch of the satellite.
So 2 satellites going up?
Yes.
When will they go up?
One is expected to go up in the middle of next year, so in the middle of of calendar 15, and the following one is expected to go up a year later.
Right. So you expect to be on satellite in what month of 2016? What time of the year?
We have said early 2016.
So
probably
February, March?
In the first quarter of 2015 would be of 2016 is what we would be targeting. We have also said in the report that we would hope and try to bring that date forward.
And that'll be just under one satellite at that time, will it?
Yes, it is.
The second one will launch in 2016.
The second, I would have to check exactly the date of the second one, but the second one is staggered by about, I can't recall if it's a year or a year and a half.
And those satellites will cover some 400,000 people in Australia, whether they be remote or whether they're 15 kilometres out of town, can't get onto the wireless or the fibre of the node or the fibre of the home. They'll cover those people not only out in remote areas like Tibooburra, White Cliffs, Wilcannia, western New South Wales, but also those people are some 15, 20 kilometres from town as well in the country towns, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's sometimes a miscomprehension of what the coverage of the satellite is. It does not cover only rural and remote Australia. It in fact covers over 100 individual beams, not only remote and rural Australia, but also all of the rest of Australia, and in particular what is referred to as urban fringes, so areas where a fixed coverage.
So even if they're just Sydney, where they're not access to wireless,
there would be places that are, close to capital cities that will be covered by the satellite.
And how many premises can those satellites, when completed, both of them cover? 400,000, is that the maximum?
That is the total capacity of those two satellites, yes.
And how long will that be enough for as the years ahead of us, of the population grows and community grows, etc.? Do you expect that those 400,000 available to those satellites, that'll suffice for how long? How many years do you think?
The demand that we forecast in the strategic review was increased compared to the previous forecast. So the previous forecast had assumed that there would be a takeout of about 20 to 25% in the areas that were supposed to be covered by the fixed wireless or satellite. In the updated demand forecast that we did in the strategic review, we brought that number to a range of 400 to 620,000. And so the two satellite will cover only part of that. The fixed wireless will cover the rest of it. Right. So the two satellite and the capacity that we put up in the air, we anticipate we'll be able to cover the maximum demand that they have. The rest will have to be made up by incremental fixed wireless capacity, because the capacity of the two satellites, once they are launched, is fixed.
Sorry, can I just clarify, you said the capacity is now forecast to be 400,000?
When you put the two satellites up in the air,
together,
you have 2 times 200, so 400.
Your forecast is putting 200 on each?
Yes.
Right, and what was the previous forecast?
No, that was always the capacity of those two satellites.
No, that's what I thought.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I thought that was the case.
Sorry.
That's why the figure 400,000. Now, probably a difficult question. Let's look down the year 2025.
You've replaced your network with an all-fibre.
Sydney Swans will be premiers about 10 times over by then, Senator Conroy.
Probably one more premiership.
How many premises do you envisage to be hooked?
How many premierships will the Swans have won by 2025?
Dozens. How many? I'll ignore the interjections. How many premises do you envisage to be relying on satellite by year 2025? And I don't say by a decimal point, just I want to have some
I would
idea.
expect that by 2025 we would probably be close to the capacity of those satellites in terms of the number of people that would have taken service on them.
400,000.
Yes.
So what do we do in remote and regional areas then?
Well, as I said, once the satellites are up in the air, you can't grow the capacity on them. What you can do is to continue to grow the fixed wireless coverage.
Grow the underground coverage.
So if you do more... Yeah. If the demand justifies it in the 2025 window, you could potentially, at that point, NBN would potentially consider putting an extra satellite up in the in space. But that's not something that was covered in the strategic review because we didn't forecast that.
Very good. Now, when it's at say peak capacity 400,000 by the year 2025, and we're just taking those figures as a guesstimation, what do you expect the downloads to be?
The download speed or the...
It's download speed, yes.
So the product is designed to be able to deliver a 25 megabits per second download speed, and that's what we'd expect the satellite to be able to continue to deliver. Right. In order to do so...
At full capacity?
It needs to manage the quantity of data that each of the users will be doing, which is why, as part of the recommendation is a strategic review, there's a recommendation to make sure that the design of the product that is made available to RSPs to then on-sell to retail users is careful in the allocation of data that each of individual users will be able to use in a monthly basis. The reason for this is to ensure that that speed delivery is indeed delivered to all customers. The learnings that we had on the interim satellite is without careful management of that product, it could impact the speed of delivery to end users.
Okay, now with those 25 megs download, I'm going to put a scenario to you. Imagine we had a nurse in a little community like White Cliffs in Western New South Wales.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the station hand workers comes in and says, look, I've got this spot on my arm. I don't know whether it's a melanoma or not. Will it be capable where she can actually put a TV screen on that, phone up the retired skin specialist in Sydney and say, turn on your computer and zoom in, will those 25 megs be able to carry out health issues like inspections of skin, cancers, etc.? Would that be able to be run okay on those down speeds?
Yeah, so
I think it's a very important issue for remote areas when it comes to health. It's going to be one of the great things of the satellites if it's capable of doing it.
So two answers to your question. First of all, the strategic review identified the premises that are of public interest, so public interest premises or PIPs, which would be typically hospital or schools. And for those, there is clearly a possibility to make a product available that would have a bigger data download cap.
So you're saying they'll get special treatment?
Yeah, because they are of public interest.
Yes.
The second question, answer to your question, in terms of speed, a 25 megabits per second product would allow a high-definition image to be sent across and therefore would allow the type of medical diagnosis that you're describing. High-definition video might be more challenging, but for a diagnostic of a spot or something like this, you would be able to send a high-definition picture, definitely.
I would clarify that factor, because
please, Mr. Morrow, continue.
Add to this. So this, I think you're touching on one of the weaknesses of satellite. Satellite has many advantages to the country because of the vast coverage that Mr. Rousselot has explained, because of the speed of us being able to get up and instantly touch the homes out there that so desperately need to have internet access. But they are very constrained in capacity, which is why in my opening statements I mentioned we'll have to curb the amount of consumption for those people using satellite than we would in the fixed wireless and or in the fixed sort of access technologies. There's a 25 megabit per second downlink and there's a 5 megabit per second uplink. So in your case, if we're in a remote area and we need to be able to transmit video on a 5 megabit uplink to a different location, that could be constrained from a quality of video point of view. Now, that does not stop the Australian citizen of taking a high-def picture and having the picture transmit and go up over a 5 megabit link to
So you're saying with a normal camera, you could take a picture, photograph, zoom in, and send that through?
Indeed, and it could be
a
high definition
camera. As video goes,
camera.
it may be more difficult.
Yes.
Okay, you're saying you're going to limit those or control those who are going to satellite. Will people in rural and remote areas get priority, given that many of them now the satellite is congested, the system is not good, they've been left behind to some certain degree over decades when it comes to communications compared to the large towns and cities? Will those people in those remote areas get priority?
Well, the moment the satellite gets turned on in space, all the beams get turned on. The good news is that in remote and rural Australia, those are the beams that are the less contested. The place where we have very tight capacity issue on the satellite tend to be the smaller beams that are targeted towards those urban fringe areas that I was describing. So
it's a bit like a water pipe, and if you have 20 taps coming off, you've got a very small stream of water. But out there, the water pipe has very few tapping off, and you've got a better supply.
That would be the typical experience that, yes, you would expect in remote and rural Australia.
Oh, very good.
You can alternate your capacities people can apply for in different beams. So in one of those small ones you've just described, could they get a greater than, is it 25 that's been... I'm just actually clarifying. I'm not trying to take out, it's actually just a clarification.
I just deducted off your time. Go ahead.
So does that mean you could actually get a larger download limit in one of those under...
In theory, potentially you could. This is not the plan. The plan is to have a universal product, but in theory, yes, you potentially could, because if there was only one customer under that beam, he could get the whole benefit of the capacity of that beam.
Okay, Mr. Morrow, I'm going to put a question that's going to be rather general. You know, everyone in this room, everyone in Australia wants to see fast broadband. In a couple of minutes summary, give the committee what challenges you face in your organisation.
Thank you, Chair. We want to deliver all Australians fast broadband service. I have had the benefit and the luxury of living in multiple different countries where I've seen from the worst to, I think, one of the best infrastructure deployments.
Can you give examples?
So if I look at Europe, in the northern part of Europe, you see very high penetration rates to where high broadband is delivered to nearly all premises in those areas. What happens is a new economy is created, a different lifestyle of convenience is offered to the citizens of these countries where we see broadband on a vast basis. I commend the Australian government for taking this NBN initiative to deliver this to the Australians. I have been on record, Mr. Chair, that very few private companies would have the ability to invest such capital requirements and expect a return, and therefore Australia would not benefit. So the government taking this move, I commend. How we do this, of course, there's multiple ways. The challenges we face is that expectations are set to deliver this fast to every Australian that exists in the country and to do it with even prices. And that is a challenge in itself to be able to do this.
So time is a challenge?
Time is a challenge. Technology to be able to roll out, to offer uniform services when we're talking about four fundamentally different sorts of technology. And of course, the constraints put on the company that are many.
The constraints put on the company?
So, for example, the regulatory aspects, and I'm not judging right or wrong, the regulatory aspects about how pricing is set forward, how there's non-discriminatory requirements that we must offer every RSP the right to be able to have the same sort of service. And if the Senator would entertain me for a moment on an example.
Please do.
Just today, Mr. Simon is chairing one of our customer committees, and we're talking about what the RSPs, the people that truly will bring the broadband service to Australians, that they're caught in a bit of a dilemma. That they need to be able to have a lower price as usage goes up, a classic economy of scale issue. Yet we cannot sell it in that manner unless our total capacity goes up to lower our cost, because we have this envelope of funding that we're dealing with. In a normal private enterprise, it would be selling to each customer or each channel. If you deliver this much data, I will lower your price by this much. That allows them to have a commitment, and they take the risk within the business model.
Let me tell you a funny story.
Hang on, no, Senator Conroy, please. Senator Conroy, let Mr. Morrow continue, please. Continue, Mr. Morrow.
And so the very fact that we can not offer one RSP a separate sort of offer, we must do it in a uniform way, puts a certain level of constraint. And again, not judging right or wrong behind this, but there are many examples that we have in order to meet the spirit and intent of what has been passed with the various statements of expectations from the very beginning of NBN. Those are the issues that we need to think through. And we, as the management of NBN, feel it is our job to bring forward to the board, to the government, when we see these sorts of constraints, and we will do just that. But it is not a clean road for us to generate this digital economy and make sure that we close, at least in part, the digital divide between the rich and the poor, between the urban and the rural, or even between Australia and these other countries that I mentioned.
Senator Seselja.
Thank you, Chair. Before I get into some questions around, I do have some further questions on the fixed wireless and satellite and some of the multi-technology mix trials and some other areas. But before I do, I just want to just go through and maybe tease out some of what's in your opening statement. You say early on that you had a supplier summit meeting recently, and you state in your opening statement that our partners were frank and forthright. They wanted us to improve our rollout forecasts, to overhaul our processes and to eliminate our internal silos. You able to just expand a little bit on that, on what they identified as some of the process problems or some of the issues with the rollout forecasts or some of the problems that they saw with your structure in terms of your internal silos?
I will offer some direct commentary, but if it would please the Senate, I think Mr. Adcock also has a great deal of detail that he can offer as well. I would first start with these partners. 20 different companies are very committed to our success within NBN. They are equally frustrated. On the three categories that we talk about, first of all, as it relates to the forecast, I have heard many stories, and I'm sure you have as well, about how third-party contractors have said, I will step up, I will invest in my own company to be able to deliver on NBN, but when they look at the forecast, they were wrong or the delivery did not turn out to be what was expected. They lost money behind that. And that has happened more than once, and hence their trust in us to rely on a forecast is really in doubt. The second issue around that drives some of this is our internal processes, and it does lead to the third issue of silos. They have told us that in certain parts of the organization, it is fabulous, it is exemplary about how to deal with NBN, yet in other areas it's very inconsistent, and equally so, they feel that there are some people within our organization that are doing or saying something entirely different than another part of the organization. But I think Mr. Adcock has a bit more color that he can put on the forecasting and the processes to which he is, I believe, adequately addressing.
Continues them. Just ignore the interjections,
Mr.
Morrow.
The former minister has had a lot of opportunities to ask questions, so we might stick to my questions for now. Thank you, Mr. Adcock.
The forecasts we're talking about, Senator, and I'm happy to put it. The forecasts that were provided were based on, and I've said it before, quite ambitious, almost aspirational targets. And so as the feedback we got at the Supplier Summit was that the supply chains had been set up and geared up to meet those aspirational targets. It's quite, it's on the public record that the targets were not achieved, and, you know,
Senator Conroy, if I were you, I'd refrain from interjecting because you're only digging yourself deeper into a hole.
No, I'll keep going, and I will attempt to address everybody's questions. As someone that was sitting on the supply side of those forecasts, Senator, when in my previous role, we were quite challenged by the construction forecasts that were given to us because we could see, looking forward, understanding the industry from a construction perspective, that the capability in the industry wasn't there to deliver against the sort of aspirational targets that were being put out there. We worked very closely with NBN to try and get them to power them back to what was, you know, realistically and doable from an industry perspective, as well as from, you know, Telstra's capability to provide, you know, remediated network, as well as.
That was a supply problem.
Mr. Adcock, disregard comments. Continue on, please.
I'm trying to be.
Won't let their child leave home.
I'm trying to be respectful to all in the chamber. So when we spoke with now with NBN, when we spoke with the supply partners, everybody was experiencing the same: high forecast, low delivery; high forecast, low delivery, sporadic. And so we set about stabilising the program so people could get confidence in the program.
Senator Conroy.
I'm talking about with NBN, and we've worked very hard.
Senator Conroy, if you're going to continue to interject, we will take a break for 15 minutes. I'll come off your time, okay? Forget it. Just speak. We gave you a very good run. Without interjections, we expect you to do the same. Continue, Mr Adcock.
So, can I just say?
Yes, certainly, Minister.
I think on a point of order, Chair, I think senators should treat witnesses at the table with respect, and none more so than someone who used to be the portfolio minister.
I couldn't agree more. Continue, Mr Adcock, and then Senator Seselja, you have the call.
Thank you, Senator. So, as Mr Morrow said, in the Supply Summit, these issues were once again aired, and we've given a commitment to the industry to speak with one voice. We have undertaken a number of structuring exercises within the operational organisation. When Mr Morrow came to the organisation, he's put the technology organisation in with the operations and the delivery organisation. So when we speak to the industry now, we do speak with one voice. We have provided the industry with one integrated forecast, and as the feedback we're getting is that it's very much appreciated. We are not, at this point in time, stretching the industry. We are trying to get stability. We have a constant flow going out of work in each of the geographies. We have provided both the supply and the delivery partner industry with a forward program. At this point in time, going out, with estimates to the end of FY15 of work volumes, not necessarily specific geographies, and we have provided that also to our supply partners. The whole objective is to get a stable base within the industry from which to grow when the multi-technology mix overlay comes in over the top. So far, as I said, the feedback from the industry on what we've done to date has been very positive. The angst between us and delivery partners has greatly diminished. We're settling a lot of the historical issues that were brought about for reasons that are many and varied, but hopefully our commitment to the industry is to try and put all that behind us, because the job ahead is quite substantial, and unless we're doing it with respect for both our suppliers, our delivery partners and our RSPs who have to sell our services, then we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, and we're all focused on making sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, so going through, there's another line in the opening statement. You say that another example is simply getting the incentives right in our partner contracts, so the focus is on connecting premises and not just passing them. Now, I understand the background, but it does seem an extraordinary thing to even have to say. I mean, surely that would just be good business practice, would be it's about connections, it's not about passing them, but presumably that line is in there is because that hasn't always been the case.
As I pointed out earlier when asked the question by Senator Williams, under the existing, under the previous and still winding down engagement instruments, the focus for the delivery partners was on premises passed, and so that left us at the top point of handover with a great percentage being at either Service Class 0 or Service Class 1. We have now put in place processes and partners to go in behind and try and get all those premises up to what we're referring to going forward as serviceable premises, and those are premises with either a connection device, a box on the side of the house, or an NTD in the house. The sort of examples of the an example of the way the regime works previously was an example I have here is a customer in Tasmania was on our website declared as in a service area, so they could order a service and it was deemed a Service Class 1. That means that the network did pass the end user's house and that there was a multi-port available in the street to connect the house. The end user placed an order for a service with their RSP, and accordingly a service technician was dispatched to the place within 2 weeks to do the lead-in because we knew it was Service Class 1. When the technician got there, he discovered that the house was 620 metres, that's over half a kilometre, from the NBN aerial attach point, And when he made inquiry about that, he was informed that the aerial lead-ins, despite the fact that there was no poles to hook to, only came in 500-metre lengths. And so the whole redesign had to go on for that particular premise and again, numerous visits back to the end user's premise to make sure that the end user could ultimately be connected to the NBN.
How much would that have cost, the 620 metre extra connection?
I haven't got the costs in front of me, but yes, the 3 or 4
wouldn't
visits...
Wouldn't be cheap.
It's not
That's
cheap.
why they work off an average.
Yeah, well,
We've asked these questions before.
No, I haven't. I haven't asked these questions before. You've made very similar interjections before, defending the NBN.
No, I'm just pointing out
leadership. But
Mr. Payne gave an answer last time about this.
You're confusing this, but and I'm going to go to some of the things where in particular you weren't at the last committee hearings. But I'll go through Mr. Adcock as well. And just one more aspect of the opening statement, and I think it's a good one because I think it's sending a different message to industry than perhaps we had under the previous management and the previous government. It says, we now have an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past where expectations were raised and often not met. I think that is absolutely clear, and I think we've heard that from your evidence. But it goes on to say, it is a damning assessment of the former government, but it says, I know this committee expects us to be transparent, and rightfully so. Some have implied we should restore what was on the website in the past. If this suggestion is that the NBN should rush information out before we have stabilised the rollout and before we have confidence in the forecasts, then we respectfully disagree. Now, I commend you for that approach, but that statement presumably has to be made because that hasn't been the approach, because it seems otherwise an odd one to say. Presumably you're saying that you're going to do things differently, and one of the ways you're going to do things differently is to not put things out on the website, raise false expectations, give people a false picture of what's going on. Is that a reasonable read of the message you're trying to get out to the community?
Yes, it is, Senator. We know, again, that people need this information. They need certain information that they can count on so they can plan, they can raise their expectations about when they can benefit from the NBN as a network. We even are thinking about the terminology that we use to simplify it to, for example, when there's a geography that's going to start the preparation, when construction actually begins, when it's completed, and completion in the definition, as Mr. Adcock is saying, as to when it's reasonably serviceable. That means a link all the way up into the home. At that point, then we can put the RSPs out to sell this product. And of course, we can accurately track from those processes we create, we can accurately, or more accurately, forecast. And I think that's what the suppliers are telling us that we would like. And that is something, a firm position that we feel that we need to take.
Yeah, great. And I think, Mr. Adcock, this might actually be going to what you were telling the NBN committee in the recent hearings here in Canberra when we spoke about what was on the website in terms of, I think, building commenced was the terminology. And I think your words were that what was on the website previously, I think, lacked any credibility, if I recall correctly, were your words. So is that an example of the type of approach you're trying to shift here in terms of forecast that lacked credibility?
You'll be treated like one.
Senator, I don't think I lack credibility.
Senator Conroy.
I did not say that. I don't think they were my exact words. I can be checked on Hansard.
What I did say
was that
you're not putting words in his mouth.
I'm not. That's my recollection. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to correct it. But I think it was in the ballpark.
What I said was that the numbers that were put up on the website as construction commenced were what I've said before were the extremely aspirational targets, and they were put up and labelled construction commenced. And Senator, you're quite right. We have both litigated this position previously. When they were in the very, very early and preliminary stages of design with no commitment to build the network and no sort of understanding of timeframes of when it would be
Waiting
built.
for remediation by Telstra.
It was well and truly before remediation with Telstra. Was
Ignore the
even mooted,
interjections, Mr.
Senator.
Adcock. Just ignore them.
No, thank you, Mr. Adcock. I think you have explained. I just was giving it some context because I think, as I say, I do think it's a better approach, and that was a previous approach that we have touched on. I want to come back to the fixed wireless and satellite, which the chair had raised some questions on, and I'll try and make sure I don't double up on anything that was asked. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the chair asked this, under the previous plan, because I know you've had the review, the fixed wireless and satellite review. Now, under Labor's plan, how many premises in the fixed wireless and satellite footprint would have been expected to not be able to access a service?
The findings in the satellite review, as I said, had a different expectation in what the demand was going to be, and I think I've mentioned the numbers before, and it went from a demand in that area of about 230,000 forecast to a range of 400 to 620. So it's a significant increase. It's based on evidence that we've seen so far. When you look at the demand that we had on the ISS, the interim satellite services, it's gone so fast that we're now at full capacity of that service and have had to cease.
45,000 on that or something?
That's
So it's so popular, it's sold out early.
And on the fixed wireless area, in areas where we have deployed, we've seen demand go in excess of 27% in some areas. So the idea of it stopping at 20 to 25% was clearly wrong. And to the point of the senator, it's true. It's because the services that are provided there are far better than what people would have experienced in the past.
Correct.
So people are demanding that
if
that
they can
service.
get access to it.
Yeah. If you look at now what was in the corporate plan of 2012-2015, there was a provision for a certain number of towers, and given that that additional demand was not part of the corporate plan of 2012 and 2015, there is indeed a demand that would not have been able to be met by the capacity of the satellite and the full capacity of the towers that were being planned. And indeed, the number that was being put forward in the strategic review is around 200,000 premises that would not have been able to be serviced should that demand eventuate and should the capacity built was the one that was planned in the 2012-2015 plan.
Okay, so 200,000 would miss out. What are there sort of particular regions that are sort of most affected by that, where the demand and the potential supply are, I guess, most divergent, where there's the biggest gap? Are there some particular regions where that's the biggest problem?
I think, as I said earlier, the biggest areas where the capacity is most evident is in those urban fringes. So areas where the previous plan had a limited number of towers, and where the additional capacity was expected to be met by the satellite. Given that there is now more demand overall, and that the satellite is a fixed capacity, it's mostly in areas where we'll have to go and push more fixed wireless towers that shortfall would have eventuated. 80,000 of it, in particular, is an area where we currently do not have spectrum, which was another finding of the strategic review. So NBN Co has managed to secure spectrum to enable the deployment of fixed wireless towers in mostly rural areas, but in the neighborhood of capital cities, we do not have yet that spectrum, and there was about, I think, 80,000 premises that, until we secure that additional spectrum, would not be able to be serviced.
Could I just clarify something, Mr. Riesler?
No, you can't.
No, this is just about a number that he's been mentioning. I just wanted to clarify. I'm just looking at your first page, Exhibit 211, or one of your first graphs, and it says satellite jumping to 206,000. So I'm just trying to understand that it doesn't increase to 400,000 at any stage. 400,000 number that rang a bell with me, which is why I nodded earlier. But I'm just looking at your strategic review.
Yeah, can you mention the
Yeah, so
exhibit?
it's Exhibit 211, Network Deployable Rollout Timetable Revised Outlook. And the forecast for customers is 200,000 through until January 21. So I'm just trying to understand where the 400,000 figure comes from.
Are you talking about the first strategic review or the fixed wireless and satellite? Because I can't find that.
So I'm looking at network deployment rollout timetable in your strategic review.
Which one? Sorry, the fixed wireless and satellite review or the
this
initial
is
strategic
the
review?
initial strategy review.
Okay, sorry,
so
my apologies.
Yeah, sorry.
Mr.
No, no.
Ruzlo, just order.
No, it's just
you
a-
can have
it's a
order. You
number.
can have time to look at that because we're going to go back to Senator Conroy when it's his turn to ask questions. In the meantime, we're going back to Senator Seselja. No buts.
No, just
you'll have time to look
clarify
at
what
our
you're
Senator
saying.
Conroy. Senator Conroy.
I'm actually trying to-
Senator
It's a
Seselja.
clarification.
You can come back when you get time to get the call again. Continue, Senator Seselja.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair. So in terms of those gaps between the demand and the supply here, are you able to just tell us how much it's going to cost to bridge that gap, or what are the cost implications that the NBN faces?
Yeah, so we looked at a number of scenarios in order to address that gap, and they included just building more towers, because as I've said, the capacity of the satellite is fixed, building more towers and also increasing the number of premises that we would service through FTTN, so fiber to the node. And then we also looked at two solutions which would include launching an additional satellite. The one that was the most cost efficient and fastest one to deploy is one that is the mix of deploying more fixed wireless towers and extending the footprint for FTTN. And the cost operating cash flows to 2021 of that solution is $5.2 billion, which compared to a number of $4 billion in the 2012-2015 plan. So it's in addition about $1.2 billion to be able to service that. Sorry, my apologies. It's a $1.2 billion operating cash flow. When you look at the cost of it, it is in fact a bit more, but it is made up by the fact that having more demand, we also have more revenues. So the net impact of having to service that demand, deploy more capacity, is an increase of $1.2 billion.
So $1.2 billion is to bridge this gap because it wasn't...
Between the corporate plan 2012-2015
yep.
and the latest view of the strategic review. The strategic review that we did in December had a very early estimate of what that was going to be, and we had put it to $1.4 to $1.5 billion. So we came quite close to the estimate that was made back then. So we're still within the envelope of the strategic review of December.
It's another $1.2 billion hole amongst many billions of dollars of holes in terms of this project. Just Mr. Adcock, just to follow up, I'm informed by Twitter, by someone on Twitter, that the words I quoted to you I believe are the exact words you used, that lacked any credibility. But I haven't seen the Hansard myself. Someone sent me a YouTube clip which I won't play, as I'm sure that would be disorderly, Chair.
I'm sure.
So I won't do it. But I believe it's there, and others can check the Hansard. Now, in terms of the multi-technology mix trials. Actually, just before I move on from fixed wireless and satellite, because I know we've got a senator from Tasmania here. In Tasmania, when it comes to fixed wireless and satellite, what are some of the gaps? How are the people of Tasmania who rely on this technology? How are the people of Tasmania who rely on fixed wireless and satellite? How are they placed? How's it been for them? How much of a gap is there in terms of that service for people in Tasmania?
Well, I think, from memory, I think there are 3 beams that are covering Tasmania from the satellite perspective. There's also a number of towers that are fixed wireless tower that are expected to be built there. I don't have the number of towers that are planned specifically for Tasmania.
So how many people miss out before you make the remediation spend the extra $1.2 billion? How many in Tasmania?
For Tasmania specifically, I don't have this answer, sorry.
Okay, perhaps.
But I can take it on notice if you would like me to do so.
Are you able to update the committee on the fibre to the node trials that are being undertaken in Umina and Epping?
Yeah, that would be for Mr.
Oh, certainly. So the trials that are currently underway in fibre to the node As we've reported, the 11 nodes in Yamina have now all been built. The access to the spare Telstra copper pairs, the agreement to facilitate that was signed late last week. And so, all the right instruments are in place now for Telstra to come and hook the node up to those copper pairs and ask NBN to engage with RSPs so that we can start to provide trial services to end users in that area. So the Yamina trial is progressing well. The Epping trial in Victoria has slowed down a bit while we work with the utility there to find a power solution, and we're working through that. On the broader FTTN trial, we continue to negotiate with Telstra, and principles have been agreed, good progress is being made, and we believe that we'll be able to commence that trial in the coming weeks.
So these trials, I know that in other countries FTTN has provided some good speeds, but can you confirm that these trials have provided proof of concept as far as Australia goes?
From where we're sitting, the FTTN and FTTB, the VDSL technology, didn't really need a proof of concept. We were confident it worked, but the trials have given us, confirmation that, our belief in the technology was appropriate. In the FTTB trial, where we've had, end users connected for quite some time, the average speeds being experienced by those users are around 106 megabits per second.
So that's FTTB?
That's FTTB, that's vectored VDSL.
Yep.
106 megabits per second down and 47 megabits per second up. That's the average. It peaks a little bit higher and drops a little bit under, but always over 100 up and around the sort of 40 up and 100 down.
40 up.
As far as the FTTN trials go, as I said, we did that one absolute speed test. I wouldn't place any sort of broader issues around that. We're waiting to get actual end users on. As I said earlier, we've signed the agreement with Telstra last week to access the spare copper pairs. We'll be turning up, end users through our RSP customers in the coming weeks. At which point in time we'll do the sort of get the feedback and get the trial results. But we've got absolute confidence that it'll deliver well and truly inside the sort of expectations that the current policy sets.
So sorry, I may have just missed it, but I know you gave us the speeds for FTTB, but did you give us the speeds for fibre to the node?
As I said, fibre to the node, we've done the one test. We've done the one test that was public. It was 105 down, and from memory 47.8 up.
So pretty similar for the two.
Pretty similar for the two.
For the two technologies.
The FTTN trial was unvectored, but the FTTB is vectored VDSL.
Okay. Now, I mean, I know this is difficult to quantify, but presumably, I mean, this to me seems like a very sensible way to go. FTTB, for instance, and is it fair to say that if this had been adopted from the start in terms of as an option, that many more people would have access to high-speed broadband at the moment?
If fibre to the basement had been adopted since the beginning of the rollout, and I believe, the Senator may know better than me, but I believe it was considered very early on, the MDU issue that confronts us today wouldn't be an issue because,
We could have competently remediated in pits. Would more people have
perhaps,
been
Chair,
today?
given Senator Conroy has had a lot of time, perhaps he can just allow Mr Adcock to...
He had 6 years
and he's had more than an hour tonight to justify those 6 years. But perhaps Mr Adcock can continue his answer without being heckled. Yes.
Yes, and you know, as you know, we're experiencing now, and I think it's pretty well publicised. You know, there's been some challenges to the NBN business model by competitors doing fibre basement because of the speed of deployment, and it is very much on our rollout radar.
Conroy.
No one was going to do it if you were going fibre.
It's very much on our rollout radar going forward.
Senator Conroy.
Don't make stories up.
It's very much on our rollout radar going forward to include fibre to the basement as one of our key deployment sets for delivering high-speed broadband. As we look forward, and as Mr Morrow pointed out in his opening statement, part of the strategy to ensure that premises are serviceable. Sorry, it's been a long day and it's getting late. Premises are serviceable as expeditiously as possible is to deploy fibre to the basement into existing MDU premises now and clearly going forward all the sort of multi-tenant premises in the rollout footprint.
Great. Now, when will NBN Co start rolling FTTP out more broadly?
FTTP, did you say?
B.
FTTP, I believe, fibre to the basement. The current roadmap, the current product roadmap, has it being available to us in Q4 of this calendar year. So, our planning is around that.
Okay, great. I'm told I've got 5 more minutes in this section, but I wanted to go, and I think this was touched on in the opening statement, but I want to go to the disconnection process in the first 15 FSAMs. Were there any situations where a home or business complained about not being informed about the disconnection or had their connection prematurely disconnected?
So the process of disconnection actually commenced some 18 months ago, the counter on the back of ready for service. So when an area is declared ready for service, that commences the counter. Over that period, there's been an extensive integrated marketing program into all of those areas. Each of those premises passed would have received at least 5 pieces of communications from the NBN. In addition to that, there would have been communications from various RSPs and telcos, plus activity by us directly in malls, kiosks, direct door knocking, particularly over the last month, as well as radio and TV appearances in the local community. Our research shows that as of March this year, the awareness in the community for both phone and data switch off was 89%. And I would suggest that that's probably grown since then, because since then we've also continued to do more door knocking and also a lot more public visibility. I'm not aware that anyone has been disconnected prematurely, but then NBN, in all fairness, does not disconnect. That is a function done by Telstra. And so they're the ones that disconnect the copper, but we have not entered the disconnection. At this point, the disconnection has only just started in terms. So I'm not aware that anyone has been prematurely disconnected. As far as awareness levels, as I said, 89% back in March with further increase. So I believe there's been an extensive program there to make sure that the community is aware. And that's reflected also by the take-up rates that we now have, where we have something in the order of about 17,500 active and pending orders up until the last week or so.
Okay, and just finally in this section, you talked about some of the stuff that was done to increase awareness, I think you talked about letterboxing and other things. Were there also sort of was the use of the sort of free media? Did we have NBN spokesmen and women out there on the radio stations and other regional media outlets to get the message out?
We had NBN spokesmen in all areas, both on radio, at times on TV, and certainly in community areas with community interest groups, in community halls, and making sure, particularly the vulnerable or the more elderly who might not have had more concerns, were addressed. So we had people in the streets, literally in every community that was subject or eligible for the disconnection in the first 15 FSAMs.
Okay, I do have questions. Sorry, Chair. I do have questions to come back to about some of those vulnerable users and others, but when we come back,
Senator Ludlam, and thank you, Senator Ludlam, for your patience. You have the call.
Thanks, Chair.
I've got a couple of different areas that I'd like to go through, starting with discrimination obligations, which, Mr Morrow, I guess that's what you were making passing reference to before about regulatory constraints. I don't know exactly what the word was that you used. The Parliament decided in 2010 that NBN Co as a wholesaler shouldn't be able to discriminate amongst its RSPs for what I thought were fairly sound public policy reasons that don't create an uneven playing field favouring incumbents. Well before your time in the chair, the Parliament had the difficult job of disaggregating a market incumbent that was exercising extraordinary market power. Why don't you provide us with your thoughts whether this is a regulatory constraint on your business that you accept, or is it something that you think should be rethought?
Well, thank you, Senator. For me, if I think about what we're trying to do, I'd make sure, again, as you say, giving everybody in Australia access, not discriminating to where one competitor has an advantage over the other, to create this ecosystem, to create where innovation flourishes, where consumers benefit from lower prices. We understand that, and we do believe that's the right way.
Okay.
Sometimes we can get too prescriptive about how that is, and a degree of reasonableness needs to enter in. And that's why we were perplexed by this, because we see an opportunity to, in fact, push the envelope to get more usage out there, more convenience, more benefit, more general digital economic benefits to the country. But if we cannot do this, we cannot get the RSPs themselves to cooperate with us. Now, we don't have a solution yet behind this. Again, we stand by the spirit and intent of what you're saying, Senator, but we want and we intend to come back and present the issues to government to see if, in fact, there's adjustments that are necessary.
You lost me halfway through. Tell me again what it is that you don't have a solution for.
Yeah, I think Mr. Simon has a lot of the detail here.
So a good example is we know that the average household data usage is growing, and today it's 40 gigabytes download per month, and on the NBN, on average, it's about 65 gigabytes of usage. However, that's average. When you actually look at the different RSPs' customer base, their averages vary greatly. Some RSPs' average is 90, while others are 40 or 50. So when we start looking at pricing and start saying, well, promote pricing to get more usage, there'll be different responses to the pricing situation or to our pricing proposals by different RSPs based on the type of customer base they have. Mm-hmm. So when you have a non-discriminatory type position, it gets very hard to promote the right type of pricing plans for different RSPs for them to then come up with their plans to promote and get more usage and more broadband out there. So that's just a good example of one example that we're facing of today.
And Senator, if I could elaborate a little bit more, the reason that we brought this forward, and we had it in the committee that Mr. Simon chairs today, is that we polled the regional service providers, the access seekers, to say, how do you feel about our pricing model going forward? Will you be able to sign up the Australian citizens? Will you be able to promote usage within? And there is grave concern about the ability to go forward as consumption continues to increase, which we've seen everywhere around the world, that they will be able to make enough money to actually stay in business to sell this service.
Yeah, how much of that has to do with price discrimination, particularly by volume? What I'm looking for, what I'm interested in specifically, is something that would benefit larger RSPs over smaller, who won't be able to offer the kind of volumes that the Telstras of the world are offering. To take from you, as I was saying.
This is the conundrum, quite frankly.
I don't quite see the conundrum. Can we just leave it the hell alone and not move on that issue?
If you'd like me to elaborate a little bit further, I'm happy to. So, again, I recently was at Vodafone here in Australia. In a certain way, I was an RSP, and I can assure you that if I see a price elastic opportunity, and I cannot have a guarantee if I start to invest to get more users, higher consumption, without seeing my price per unit come down, I'm not going to take the chance. I'm not going to bear that risk. That was our problem, that we cannot afford to do that. The funding envelope, this non-discriminatory element on it, restricts us from being able to have that sort of leverage within. So we're at a checkmate situation. The RSPs cannot push higher volume expecting to have a lower cost structure, and we cannot offer up individual RSP-related usage-based services. So that doesn't mean, Senator, that we don't have a solution. We just ran into this checkmate situation that's driven from all of the various constraints behind NBN and the limitations that any kind of for-profit RSP can pursue.
Okay. So are you of the view, it sounds as though you are, but let's just get it down in black and white, that there should be some form of price discrimination for volume, for data volume, offered to different RSPs depending on their business model?
I'm of the view we have to find a solution that allows the RSPs to know if they sell more, they're going to have a lower cost structure.
So Telstra's going to sell more than most other of its competitors combined, so you're not going to lock them into further advantages to scale.
And I understand, Senator Ludman, that's the concern, and that's the reason that this constraint is in place. That's the reason that bit of regulatory elements in there.
Yeah.
And trust me, coming from the underdog at Vodafone, I get this, and I don't want to see a big significant market player come in and dominate the rest of this environment. I'm completely on board with that, but we've trapped ourselves a little bit. So the question that we have for ourselves is, what's the solution to come back to ensure that you don't have the big heavyweights that squeeze out the little smaller challengers, but we don't constrain ourselves because of this limitation that we have.
One of the reasons I'm asking is that the government's in negotiation with that very same heavyweight at the moment over access to its infrastructure, and it's kind of got the government over a barrel because there's nowhere else for the government to go. Are those conversations happening in parallel?
They are indeed.
They are indeed. So how's that working out?
In parallel, we have JB that is working the solution, the contract for this access. We have Mr. Simon that works with Telstra as an RSP.
Is Telstra arguing for that form of price discrimination?
You've got to just be clear. We have not entered into detailed discussions on pricing with RSPs.
We've entered into general discussions on pricing with RSPs?
No, we've entered into price constructs, and we've had an exploratory discussions with RSPs to confirm the pricing structures that we've had and also explored alternative pricing structures. We have not had any discussions on price points. What we're looking at is to look at how we can actually come up with pricings to make sure that we continue to stimulate usage and get the right outcomes. I'd also make the point just need to think about your comment that Telstra will sell more and also get the advantage. We're not necessarily talking about selling more users or connecting more users. We're talking about more data per end user. So you could still be a small provider in total customer base, but your individual usage per customer can be quite high. And generally, when you look around the world, it tends to be a lot of the innovators and many smaller companies who tend to promote some of those plans initially. So we do have to cater for different types of RSPs and different types of end-user bases. That's just a factor that we have to work on, and I think Mr Morrow is simply saying that's a problem we've got and we're going to have to work through it.
Is it your understanding that any amendments to those arrangements would need to come through the Parliament? It's not simply something for the company itself to decide? That's correct.
It is, yes.
Absolutely.
Where to from here? Just on the discrimination question before I move on, where do you intend to take that? Are you going to go to the market with some proposals? Are you going to the government with proposals? What happens next?
So again, I think the process that Mr. Simon outlined, we seek industry input to how we can create the right model going forward, whether this model is sustainable with what was originally envisioned. If we feel we have a solution that would require either a change in Parliament or a change in the regulatory regime, then naturally we bring that forward to the appropriate authorities.
And to be clear, that industry input is done across the board, so we consult with the entire industry.
With the whole industry, large and small?
Yep.
Serious matters.
That's our PDF process, Product Development Forum process. It's called the Product Development Forum process, and we use all the RSPs are members of that. And we put product documentation out for consultation, and we have meetings with them, and they have ability and they do input back into any concepts that are tabled.
And presumably there's a lot more on your plate than just the discrimination question that I'm bringing up, as far as what that forum is doing.
That forum is the way we actually develop entire products. So, for example, the way we're going about developing our FTTN and FTTB product architectures, we consult with the industry, we get their feedback, we bring that feedback back into a consultation document, we put it back to the industry for further ratification, and then we look at the options and the best way going forward.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us about the second element, and I don't know at what point you're going to need to pass across to Senator Fifield, the renegotiation of the $11 billion deal with Telstra. Maybe we'll start with NBN Co. Who has carriage of that exactly?
I do.
You get all the easy jobs. How is that working out?
These negotiations are progressing. There is, I think, goodwill on all parts. They are complex. I'm sure you've seen the volumes of the DAs and the ISA, so they're not simple negotiations. But the only thing I can say at this stage is they're progressing, and that both parties are entering in those conversations with goodwill.
Was that meant to have been concluded by the middle of the year? Do you have a fixed date when you want to close that arrangement?
We didn't have a fixed date. In the strategic review, we made some assumptions which had some allowance for that negotiation to take some time. They were part of the redacted section of the strategic review for commercial reasons, not to put us at a disadvantage in our negotiation with Telstra.
And I recognise these are pretty sensitive commercial negotiations, but there's a massive amount of taxpayers' money on the table. So what can you tell us about the overall shape of the agreement, or what it's going to look like?
Just as you said, because of the sensitive nature of those negotiations, I would not want to say anything about those negotiations until they're finalised.
And give away taxpayers' money.
What kind of leverage do you bring to those negotiations, or are you simply a price taker at this point?
If you think about the dynamics, I think Telstra has also in its interest to see the NBN develop. Ultimately, they will become a very large customer of NBN, so they have an interest to make sure that that project goes through. Mm-hmm. So, those are the type of conversations that we have with them.
Yep, and they will be seeking to have that project go through and bringing the maximum commercial benefit to themselves and their shareholders.
They are a private company. I would expect that they would be doing as good as they can from a commercial perspective. The similar thing from an NBN side, we will try to get as good a deal as we can for the shareholders and ultimately the taxpayers of Australia.
Are you confident that that deal will be closed within the funding envelope that you've been given by your shareholder ministers?
At this stage, I don't have anything that would challenge that. But again, these are ongoing negotiations and they're not final, so I can't comment on that.
And is it your expectation that you will still be leasing Telstra's equipment, or are you proposing to buy the gear, or is there any substantial renegotiation? Because what you're doing is not proposing to lease ducts and then rip copper out and use that infrastructure. You need to use a substantial amount of what Telstra had and has in the ground. What can you tell us, what kind of update can you provide us with as to the state of the infrastructure that you're proposing to buy or lease?
The part of the agreement will include a significant amount of due diligence that will be done on the networks that we would be able to secure access to. But at this stage, I can't disclose any of those because they're part of those negotiations.
But if Telstra offers you a price that you're unwilling to pay, what are you going to do?
Oh, no, it's working the other way around.
If you think
throwing cash at them saying,
please take this rotten copper off us.
The negotiations that we have are about accessing a number of networks from Telstra, and we'll be negotiating a price to access them, terms to access them. Those negotiations are ongoing, and
yeah. I think either myself or Senator Conroy or others have put this question to you every single time we've had you here, so be ashamed to miss the opportunity now. Do you have an estimate for the public who's going to be writing the cheque as to the ongoing maintenance and or remediation costs of the copper?
I do not at this stage, and it's one that is in the strategic review. There were some assumptions made around it, and those numbers have been kept redacted because we thought that they would be commercial in nature in the negotiations that we're about to enter with Telstra.
And so it's the end of May 2014 and you still can't tell us what those estimates are?
Until the negotiation is completed, I don't think it would be appropriate to release that number.
That's going to be fascinating, isn't it? Is the company still committed to the principle of universal service and cross-subsidy, where the lucrative urban markets subsidise the satellite and wireless product on the fringes of the network?
It is, Senator.
It is. Senator Fifield, is that still firmly government policy?
Senator, I'll take that on notice.
Oh, God, really?
Sorry?
Really?
Yeah, really. Those sort of broader policy questions are more appropriate for 1.1, and I'll take it on notice.
That's a significant worry. Has there been any change since the last time we put that question to you, which is February?
No, Senator, I'm saying I'm taking it on notice.
So I shouldn't read too much into...
Don't. I'm not the Minister for Communications. I'm not the Minister in that portfolio. I'm the Minister representing here, so I'll take that on notice. As I say, it's more appropriately something for 1.1.
All right. I'm going to take Mr Morrow at his word then, that it's still the company's ambition or policy, and we'll get something back from Senator Fifield at his leisure. How does that principle work if you're being encouraged to sell parts of the network? So, for example, sell your satellite product once it's up in the air.
We're not being encouraged to sell the satellite product.
You're being encouraged to sell any part of the network or get it ready for privatisation, full or partial sale?
I have not been informed of anything of that, had any request made of what can we sell within the network, so no, Senator.
You look genuinely surprised, which is good, at my question.
Yeah.
At this stage of the build, is NBN a saleable company?
Everything is sellable, whether it's at a price that anybody would accept. Or pay to have it taken.
At this stage of the build, are you a company that makes more than it spends?
No.
No. How long before you are?
Well, I think this is for review as we look at the revised corporate plan, as we need to iron out the Telstra deal. Senator, there's several variables that are in the way of being able to answer that question. But we understand, again, as custodians of such a substantial amount of money that the taxpayers of Australia have put forward, we want this to be as profitable as soon as possible. We want this to create value, as I know you do as well.
Indeed. Just coming back to those figures about copper, remediation and ongoing maintenance when we take that asset off Telstra, or that liability as it may turn out, will those figures will presumably have to be made public then? They're going to be on your quarterly and annual reporting from that moment on. Is that your understanding, Mr Rousselet?
Sorry, the maintenance that we will incur in maintaining the copper network?
Yeah, that becomes one of your assets at that point. You'll have to disclose.
I don't know the level of details we gave into
That would just get rolled into the general
total maintenance, but clearly they'd be part of the accounts. Whether there'd be a specific line that identified copper maintenance in our accounts, I don't know.
There's no reason why not, though, right? You've told me that it's commercially sensitive at the moment, but once you close the deal, those figures will go onto NBN's books and everybody will know what we're paying.
Well, can I suggest that there might be people that provide part of the maintenance service, and it might still be in the interest of NBN Co to provide a global number for maintenance of network and not provide too much detail to potentially keep some negotiating capacity in seeking people to provide some of the maintenance services.
So you're saying that we might do this deal with Telstra and still not know what the clean-up and remediation and maintenance cost of that asset would be? Even once it's a taxpayer liability or an NBN liability?
Whatever financial disclosures that will be asked of NBN, I'm sure we'll cope with.
Well, that's not really the case. I just asked you to disclose the financial detail and you told me it's commercially sensitive.
Well, yeah, I think how much we're asked to disclose in our financial accounts is probably questions that you should put to the minister. I don't know the details that we will be required to put in our accounts in terms of detailing the split of our maintenance costs.
Some of the lines of questioning earlier, I think it might even have been the chair, was putting to you about satellite capacity and the need for a third satellite, and the numbers being revised up from, I believe it was, I was out of the room, but I believe it was between 400 and 600,000 people. Is that about right? And how much of that additional demand is from population growth? How much from unanticipated increase in data traffic? And how much of it is from people being shunted out of the fixed wireless footprint and into the satellite footprint?
So I think the numbers that you're quoting is a number that takes into account both the fixed wireless and satellite.
The 400 to 600?
So no, the 230, which has now gone to a range of 440 to 620, that covers the entire fixed wireless and satellite area. And
sorry.
My apologies.
Have you finished that answer?
No.
You're still answering?
Yeah.
Continue answer. When you finish answering, we're going to have a tea break.
Thank you, Chair. The bulk of that demand is triggered by an increased assumption of the demand. So it's more. It's not an increase in population. It's just how much of the population in those areas are expected to ask for a NBN service. In the previous strategic review, corporate plan, it had assumed a take-up rate of roughly 20 to 25%. So 20 to 25% of the premises in those areas would take up an NBN fixed wireless or satellite service. In the new strategic review, that assumption has been increased to 60 to 65%.
Okay, we'll break for 15-minute tea break, and at 3/4 time, Sydney Swans 95, Geelong 16. Mr. Morrow, have you started to watch Australian football yet?
I have indeed, and the Swans are my...
They are ignoring me? Never mind. Okay, before we return to Senator Ludlam, wherever he is, Mr. Morrow, you want to clarify something on pricing?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Order. Continue.
Thank you, Chair. There's already a bit of chatter online about the discussion that we were just having, and I would like to clarify, if I may. When it comes to pricing, we have two basic pricing constructs, something called AVC, which is the access, and something called CVC, which is about usage. We do honor all of the regulatory requirements about non-discriminatory practices. The discussion we were having earlier is about industry input, that we have a problem to solve. We have not made any changes to our prices. We do not intend to make any changes without going through all of the proper approvals. At this stage, it is nothing more than industry input, dialogue, discussion, and at the point that we make the decision, we will make the necessary announcements. So please, for the committee, please do not think that we are in any way offering the big heavyweights any more advantage than already what they have today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morrow. Mr. Ludlam, you had a couple more questions.
Senator
Ludlam, sorry.
I'll be brief because I realise other people have been very patient. My final set of questions just around remote Aboriginal communities. I'm a representative from WA. I don't know if you've had time to come out west yet, but you'd be very welcome. Communities ranging from a few dozen people up to a few hundred, and in some instances, 1,000 or more. With populations that are quite mobile, very, very long way from the hardline footprint, and probably a long way from any of your wireless towers. Can you just tell us what kind of product, given that you're further down the line of the satellite rollout than probably the fixed fibre or fibre to the node footprint, what news can you give me to take back to Western Australia or Central Australian Aboriginal communities about the kind of products that you can tailor specifically to them?
Greg, do you have any detail on the rollout for WA?
Not just WA, but that whole Central Australian footprint. Completely different kind of market.
About the remote satellite footprint and the product services. So, again, it would be more into the sort of product construct around the strategic review and the long-term satellite 25/5 product.
Yeah. Perhaps what I can offer is that with the interim satellite service that went up, as far as those people that qualify for that, as you heard the chair say earlier, 45,000 customers are already using that service. Because of the capacity limitations of that, we are not selling that anymore. There is just no more capacity. If we were to add customers, it would degrade the service even more.
Yep.
Therefore, the relief from that comes out of the strategic review. If all of the recommendations are adopted by government, then we will, of course, move forward with the long-term satellite solution, and they can expect to see some relief in that early 2016 timeframe.
Early 2016, so help's maybe on its way. I don't know whether to put this to you, Senator Fifield, because you'll immediately hit an element of market failure. You're not going to find yourself overrun with RSPs falling over each other to provide a retail service to a community 1,000 kilometres from the nearest sealed road. So who's going to provide retail services to places like Warburton and Jigalong? And is that going to be left to the market, or Senator Fifield, I guess looking to you, is there a public policy answer here somewhere as well?
Look, I'm happy to leave it to officers at the table to...
You can if you like. We'll see what they have, but they're not retailers. Their customers are retail service providers, most of them metro-based.
Mr. Simon, do you have any information about RSPs that are interested in serving these areas?
So we do have RSPs that do provide facilities and well set up areas in remote. Now, clearly, part of this is the migration from ISS to long-term, but also the additional capacity that will be opened up for new customers. And we clearly recognise one of the things we have to do with the industry is make sure that we galvanise and build up their implementation resources. Part of the discussion we're having with them is the cost of installations, what are those price points, but also what about remote installation. So exactly what you're talking about. So there's an awareness that we will have to be able to create a remote installation capability to be able to go out and install and suit for these and solve for these areas. And I believe that while traditionally RSPs have not always serviced these areas, if we are able to, with the capacity that's coming on board, there'll be a far more viable case for them to provide that. So I'm confident over the next 12 months as we enter into finalisation of both the product constructs and also gearing up the industry for taking on the orders, we will find solutions for all of these areas.
Do you think this is something the market can solve by itself? I still struggle to imagine.
It may not. It may be that we have to look at creating some central capability to be able to find an alternate type of RSP, the non-traditional RSP, to provide service. I think that's one of the elements that we'll have to look at. Okay.
And is that something that you think it's NBN Co's job to
We'll have the beams. We have beams that cover those areas. We want to make sure those beams are used. We want to optimise the assets and get the best commercial return that's possible. So to do that, we need to get end users connected, and they need it to be connected for a service provider.
Okay. Have you had any contact with the Indigenous Remote Communications Association? Does that ring a bell?
I personally haven't, but that doesn't mean NBN Co hasn't. I can check that, take that on notice.
If you could take that on notice, and if you discover that you've not spoken to them, can I propose to put them on your call list?
Sure.
Met with them this afternoon. They've got some very innovative ideas, for example, for Wi-Fi mesh installations on communities, as I say, 300 or 400 people, that allow, because of course very, very poor non-existent mobile cell coverage as well. You guys can be a very, very big part of the solution for communities for which telecommunications, can make a massive difference. If you've not been in touch with them, very much appreciated. Just lastly, and I know I'm probably testing the patience of the chair here.
There's number 2 question. Yeah,
last and second last. Yeah, you're on to me. You're still trialling fibre to the node configurations, and I don't know that anybody's asked that yet. If you have,
yes, they have.
Yes. How's that going? Is that all on the transcript?
That's all. Mr. Adcock?
It's going great.
Very well asked and very well.
Do you want to
just give us a 10-second summary before the chair kicks me out of the room?
The 10-second summary is the
moving on.
The pilot in your minor. The 11 nodes are stood and powered. We have agreement as of last week with Telstra to access the spare copper pairs, and we'll be in the process of working with RSPs to get trial customers over in the coming weeks.
All right. When can members of the public
Last
expect
question,
to see...
Senator Ludlam.
Yeah, that's fair enough. When can we expect to see some published results of how well that's working out?
As I said, we'll get some trial customers over in the coming weeks, and then we'll publish results accordingly. We declared the results earlier of the FTTP trials, where we're experiencing on average 106 down and about 47 up consistently.
Somewhat more interested in the fibre of the node trials, but we'll come back to you maybe the next...
Okay, thank you, Senator Adams.
Thanks, Chair.
Senator Xenophon, you have 5 minutes questions.
You're a generous man, Chair. Just wanted to go to some questions.
Don't encourage him.
I think you've already been asked some questions about the state of Australia's copper networks and the impacts it could potential implications for the NBN rollout. Is South Australia similar, better or worse than other states when it comes to rollout in terms of the state of its copper?
I got no idea.
It's unknown at this point in time. Earlier, Mr. Russell answered the question as to access to the data that would give us that, being part of the negotiations that are still underway. It is not our copper network. We don't have visibility of the state of the copper.
I know it's not your network, but and it has an assessment being carried out, because that will ultimately, the state of the copper network will determine the effectiveness of the NBN.
Yes, the answer I provided earlier to Senator Ludlam is that part of the due diligence that will be conducted as part of securing the deal with Telstra will include an assessment of the copper.
And if you could take on notice, it may be a question for other estimates as to what the state of the copper is in South Australia. The other issue is that in terms of the previous rollout plans or schedule for South Australia, can you tell me where you're at on that in terms of the earlier schedules, in terms of the rollout? How far behind schedule is it? Where are we at? What problems do you anticipate?
With fibre to the premise.
In terms of homes being connected to the NBN in South Australia.
Sorry, specifically South Australia. Can
you please I was elected by the people of South Australia. I reckon I should ask about South Australia.
That's fair. Can I have the question again?
I'm happy for this to be taken on notice, but if you have any information in terms of the number of households that have been connected to the NBN in South Australia, in terms of your latest figures, how that compares with previous forecasts or schedules in respect to that, and what you're proposing in the next 12 months to 2 years in respect of that.
Our connections to date in South Australia, to that specific question, we currently have 2,700 premises activated, which is at this point in time 22.5% of the serviceable premises that have been passed.
So what do you mean by 22.5% of the premises that you've passed? Does that mean...
So the premises that are currently ready for service in South Australia are about 11,800, of which 2,700 are activated.
Because only 22% have taken it up, is that right? Or
22% have taken it up, yes.
Is that the sort of take-up rate you were forecasting?
Could you, if you're going to play that game, can you break it down into each FSAM and each FDH?
Oh.
And whether it's been open for 1 day or it's been open for 6 months?
Fair. No, I was asked for the raw figures, Senator. I gave the raw figures.
I'm happy for those additional figures.
Wollonga, as you would know, has had the highest take-up rate in the country consistently. So it just depends on, if you turn 2,000 on the first day, guess what your take-up rate is? 0.
That's correct.
If you take it,
and I'm very
6 months later, what might it be?
Senator Conroy,
Chair,
Chair,
I'm grateful to Senator Conroy because I think that it should be taken in context. I don't want it to be taken out of context.
No, you're not seeking to. You're not seeking to.
Nor was I seeking to answer the question out of context. Look, I'll just take it on notice and that'll make it easy and I'll respond. I was happy to give you the answers that are in front of me for South Australia, but as Senator Conroy points out, I would not want to be putting it on...
I'm happy to get those answers on the basis that it's qualified in the context that Senator Conroy quite properly pointed out. I don't think there's any harm in that if information is provided in that context. I don't have a problem. And I think Senator Conroy says, and I don't doubt it, that Wollonga has a particularly the highest take-up rate in the country. That's terrific. I'm just trying to get a feel for where we're at in South Australia.
Can I offer just a little bit of colour on this? I don't think in any way the numbers that Mr. Adcock was presenting would suggest that people don't want the broadband service, and that the 22% number is not something because people are saying I don't like the current product that's there. We've had a number of issues around the lead-ins, the ability to sell on that, issues with the RSPs, the delivery partners. When we get the rest of the issues sorted out, which we're working on, we expect the penetration rates to be far higher, Senator, and that's what we're working on.
So, Mr. Morrow, the issues with respect to delivery partners, that's relevant in terms of the timing of the the availability or the timing of the rollout, isn't it?
Well, no. What I'm referring to is before we can ask the RSPs that John is helping manage, push and sell the service for the homes, because there's a demand out there. People want it. We need to get the delivery partners to help us route those lead-ins all the way up to the home to where there's a shorter order period, if you will, so customers aren't frustrated. So again, it's not a criticism whatsoever.
And again,
of the product.
reflecting the remarks of Senator Conroy, which I think are entirely fair. If you've got a delivery, if there is a connection made to a property, or there's 11,800 premises that have access to it, but because of issues with delivery partners, that obviously has to be taken.
And I'm not blaming the delivery partners, just to be clear here. This is an issue of why homes passed versus homes that truly can move into this service class 3 or 2 is more important for us.
Yeah.
If we looked at the percentage of connections made against those with service class 2 or 3, it would be a very different number. And I think illustrate what Senator Conroy is trying to say is that this product is popular and that people want it.
And that's fine. And look, I'm happy for there to be, if you can provide some extra information, but I think, again, reflecting Senator Conroy's comments, and Mr. Morrow's comments, that there can be some discernment of those figures in terms of which are ready to hook up to buy commercial service.
Yes. We'll respond with that.
Right. And what in terms of what is anticipated, say, in the next 12 months, by, say, 30th of June next year, in terms of the number of premises that the NBN will pass? In other words, how many... In South Australia. In South Australia.
Yeah. We'll take that on notice.
We'll take that on notice.
But you did have forecasts previously, didn't you? About delivery, about rollout of the NBN in South Australia. There were previous forecasts, weren't there?
We have been over. I said I don't want to re-prosecute on arguments because the Senator will jump on me.
No. Don't be intimidated by Senator Conroy. I'm sure you're going to be intimidated. He's just tired and cranky.
No, Senator Conroy has shared his views, and we have now published on the website where the areas that are currently under construction with our delivery partner. We have re-established relationships with 2 delivery partners in South Australia, key delivery partners, namely SAPN.
2, you said?
2, yes.
Yeah, SAPN and...
Fulton Hogan. And those relationships are now very good, and we've put a schedule down, and they're now actively building, and I will provide to you those FSAMs where they are building and what the estimated
and also the benchmark previous forecasts and in terms of previous forecasts for the rollout as well.
Again, previous forecasts. This was the earlier conversation. It goes to what you would consider as a forecast. We have reforecast FY14, and we are now working with the delivery partners to stabilise on revised forecasts. And so I'm happy to provide those, but I don't. When you say the previous forecast, if you're going back a number of years, that's the very issue that we were discussing earlier about them being... So
they're as accurate as long-range weather forecasts, perhaps?
Basically, yes.
Okay, can I just go finally, the very generous chair, if it's been covered already, the issue of asbestos, has that been covered tonight?
It hasn't been covered.
Mr. Adcock is an expert in it.
Good.
He was in charge of Telstra's remediation of the asbestos before he joined NBN Co.
No, I'm very grateful to Senator Conroy's context. There were all those problems, what was it, last year or 2 years ago now?
It was last year.
Last year. Is that now under control? Because I've had complaints from constituents and some people who worked as contractors or as subbies rather, as subcontractors or worked for contractors rather. What's happened with respect to remediation? How has it affected the rollout of the NBN and have the safety?
Feel free to take it on notice and let's move on.
In fairness,
Well, it's okay. If it's on notice, it's still being raised.
I'm not going to take the question on notice because the asbestos issue primarily is a Telstra issue, and I don't work for Telstra.
Yes, but insofar, I know it's a Telstra issue, but it does affect the rollout of the NBN, correct? It affects the NBN.
The history is well documented. There was an issue highlighted, and I'm happy to be correct on the dates, but my memory says it was May last year.
Senator Conroy will correct you, don't worry.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. May last year, at which point in time, works were suspended while the processes were reviewed, and
For about 5 months.
And following that review, to the best of my understanding, works are now progressing as normal. So I don't understand that there is a current issue.
Okay, there isn't a current issue. No. It's no longer delaying the project.
It's no longer
and
delaying
the remediation is being dealt with, so it's not affecting.
Remediation is being undertaken as commencement notices are issued to Telstra. Remediation is commencing. Yeah.
That's it. Well, there you go, Chair. There's my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. Is that on Senator Urquhart? Senator Conroy.
Thank you. Got to finish his before I do mine.
I just want to pick up on a couple of points, and hopefully they're relatively straightforward. Mr. Ruslow, I was referring to the corporate plan before. The number in the strategic review is 200,000. So I'm just trying to understand. I vaguely had a 400 number in my head as well.
Yeah.
But your strategic review indicates 200,000 on the satellites.
Yes.
And you're now talking about 400,000 being on the satellites. Could you just explain what the change has been?
What I was going to propose, because I've spent quite a bit of time in the background trying to understand, because it is not apples for apples comparison. So I want to make sure that I will put that question on notice, and I will give you a detail. It has to do with the capacity. It has to do with the design of the kilobits per second allocated to each users, and the assumptions between the two strategic review were different, and it has to do with the total capacity that we have on there. So if I can acknowledge that there is some inconsistency.
Do you have any excess capacity on these satellites?
No, we will not have excess capacity on the satellites.
So why is Parliamentary Secretary Paul Fletcher walking around saying he wants to sell off the excess capacity on the satellites?
Sorry, let me rephrase this. On average, we do not have excess capacity on the satellite. Beam by beam, the case is very different. On the beam that are in the urban fringe areas, we definitely are at total capacity and we don't have spare capacity. On the beams that are directed towards the remote and rural Australia, that capacity is not as acute, and in some areas we would be able to potentially have spare capacity used by other users.
The previous government had a policy that NBN Co were not to sell to other than consumers, putting aside schools and, say, hospitals and institutions like that. In other words, you couldn't target mining companies to try and compete with the private sector. Is that still the policy? You cannot go and try and sell to
in terms of policy, it's probably a question better directed to the ministers. In terms of our mandate, we're trying to look at every opportunity to generate revenues out of the assets that we have. If it's consistent with the policy, we'll be chasing those opportunities.
So you would be competing with satellites to try and sell to mining companies?
I don't know whether that will be compatible with the policy. I'd have to check that before I could answer your questions.
No,
but the mandate we have is to go and look at every opportunities.
You will.
Sorry?
If you're able to, you will, you're saying?
If I was directed through policy to do, I would maximise the revenue of the assets that are at our disposal.
Providing that it didn't reduce the capacity of the consumers?
Absolutely. It would have to be in areas where we have spare capacity.
I'll be interested in the, because as you say, your strategic
review
says 200,000 and suddenly a few months later you're up to 400,000 and that's caused quite a lot of confusion.
So I'll definitely take that on notice.
And is that because you've limited the download per user, the fair use policy?
Part of it has to do with the download per user speed, and part of it has to do with the increased demand that we have forecast. So again, because it's a complex answer, I think it's better handled.
I said it was more. I was asking generally out of interest because your own document said 200. So
when you asked the question, it puzzled me too. So I understand.
Okay, your minor. you mentioned the FTTN you've now signed. What is the line length of each of the homes in your minor that are going to be trialling? It's a question you're actually going to have to answer one way or the other. So what are the line lengths? Like, you know exactly which houses you're going to be potentially accessing, then you've got to get RSPs to sign them up. I get that.
That's correct.
But what's the line lengths in your minor, in your footprint for FTTN?
We signed an agreement last week with Telstra for access to the copper loops. Yeah. As I said, we're going to go back out now and cut them over, at which point in time we'll categorise the copper. The loop lengths will dictate the service that's provided.
I'm asking what the lengths are.
I don't know at this point in time. And as you,
when will you know?
Senator, as you know, Senator, it will vary from distance from the node.
That's what I'm asking for. So when you come out with your announcement of the speeds that you've achieved, I'll be able to say, well, on these lines, there were X amount that were this distance and X amount that were this distance.
When we come out with the speed results, as we did with the one ping test we did, we were quite open with what the loop length was, that it wasn't new copper. We were utilising the existing lead into the premise. We were utilising the existing.
So I'm just seeking to get that information in advance, hoping that you may already know what the line lengths were.
At this point in time, we don't know. We were working on the agreement, and as we go out and turn up customers, I'll make sure for future reference that we keep not only the speeds but the loop length on which they were achieved.
Now, last time I had a discussion with Mr McLaren about the configuration of your nodes. Do you want to update the information Mr McLaren provided? Because the question of the capacity per node, depending on how many homes it could service, then it depended on whether the secondary service is going in. Like, I've been sent the specs of your nodes, and you can't do as many homes as Mr McLaren was suggesting. I'm not saying he was trying to mislead the committee, but there was a question mark around how you were configuring inside the nodes and what services were being provided.
I'm happy to provide any clarification on notice.
It's a question whether it was 286 versus 400 versus
less than
the conversation. It was all of that conversation. I know you were. You probably weren't quite as focused on it as I was.
I think the conversation went around the theoretical capacity being 384, the actual built capacity.
But Senator, did not Gary McLaren come back and clarify at the end of
you take it on notice, and then it has to go to Mr Turnbull's office. It takes 3 years. So I'm just following up now.
But I thought he came back during the select committee.
We did have a further discussion, and I said to him, look, someone literally while I was there sent me the specs of the nodes. And I said, so I'm chasing an update. I'm not anticipating that you could answer it now.
Right. There's an outstanding question, taken on notice question that we still...
Where are you at with fibre on demand in HFC and FTTN?
Where are we at with fibre on demand? It's part of the...
Fibre on demand.
Yeah, it's part of the developing principles.
So nowhere at this point? I'm just checking that there's no product yet available.
So
secondary question is, will it be available...
We'll go through the same process that we're going through our FTTN, B, HFC...
No, but will it be available in the FTTN footprint and the HFC footprint? It's a yes or no question.
The intent of it would be available, yes.
Okay.
We haven't formulated it though.
Okay. Now, Mr Simon, you mentioned the switch off in... Sorry? You mentioned the switch off, talk about awareness, 89%. You mentioned 19,000 homes. Last time, unfortunately, you were genuinely on the job, so Mr Adcock was answering questions. Last time it was indicated about 17,000 or 17,500 were all... was how many had signed up so far. The next day in the papers, Mr Turnbull's office briefed out there were only 750 homes out of the 19,000 that hadn't at least had a pending order. So that was about 4 weeks ago. Your figures seem to be a little behind what Mr Turnbull's office briefed out about 4 weeks ago. So as of Friday, how many of the 19,000 homes hadn't either got a service or a pending in?
I'm not sure I understand your reference to the 19,000 homes.
Oh, sorry, 19,000 lines. There's 9,000. There's 27,000 homes in the 15 areas, and there was 19,000 lines.
You mean active copper services?
Active copper services, sorry, yes.
Oh.
Active copper services.
That's a Telstra number. I think it's an estimate that was probably given. So we'll get...
Well,
we
Mr Switkowski embarrassed himself in a speech a while ago about 19,000, where he claimed all 19,000 could be turned off, notwithstanding that over 17,000 already had a service. That was then corrected. Yes, it was his speech, not me. And then that led to the discussions last time. So 19,000 was the number that was indicated. And Mr Morrow and Mr Adcock were there. And it was said that about 2,500 was still to order a service.
Yep.
But Mr Turnbull's office then briefed out that afternoon, which is in the papers the next day, that only 750 homes of the 19,000 were outstanding, hadn't placed an order. Mm-hmm. As of Friday, how many was it? I'm not saying anyone's been disconnected, I'm just actually seeking to establish how many homes...
I can't answer that question because we get a monthly update from Telstra on the active copper services. Once I get that update, then
Do you know what your pending orders are?
My pending orders, we have 1,185 pending orders for the NBN.
No, pending orders in the 15 FSAMs.
Yes. And
okay, so you had 1,500 and...
I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, my question is I'm trying to establish how many people hadn't ordered a service or been connected. I'm just...
The two are different.
Putting it...
So there's...
Yeah, one's connected and one's ordered. So they're very different. But for the purposes of the not getting cut off, people were aggregating them together. And the commentary publicly was if you had ordered a service, you wouldn't be cut off.
Yes.
This is a good thing.
Yes, so you're trying to find the delta between... So you want the delta between the active copper services and the NBN active and pending, yeah?
Well, I'm trying to understand how many people, as of last Friday, this cut-off date, would technically be cut off. I appreciate no one was, and I'm not suggesting they should be, and I can't understand how you can't have that number. Like it's the most important number in the job you're doing at the moment.
So just to be very clear, and you're familiar with the DA, because it was signed 4 years ago, the DA, the responsibility is for Telstra to disconnect. It's their copper network.
Yes, I'm not talking about how many are going to be disconnected. I've said I'm not interested in that, but there is a notional number of disconnections. So I'm not asking you who has been cut off.
Yes.
I'm asking you notionally of the 19,000, and I appreciate that you're saying it's not your number. That's the first time anyone's said it's not your number.
No.
So of the 19,000 that were identified by NBN Co staff, including the Chief Operating Officer, how many of those have an order or are connected? And by definition, in a subtraction game, how many people... As of Friday, the cut-off date.
Yeah, so we have 17,500.
And that includes the 1,500 you've just said? You mentioned there were 1,500 pendings.
Yeah, so
what I'm saying
active
is 17...
and ordered, so they're pendings, we have 17,500.
And if you use the 19,000 assumption...
The delta is 1,500.
Right, that Telstra had given, that you got to ask them about their numbers is what
No, I'm just confused because Mr Turnbull's office briefed,
You'll have to talk to Mr. Turnbull about
that afternoon. No, but I'm sorry, it was in the papers. He's the minister, and his office briefed that there were only 750 homes 4 weeks ago that were that delta, to use your words.
So that was I'll have to speak to him, but we were looking at the sales order run rate and doing a trajectory. The number you need to work out is how many have connected to NBN or have a pending order, which is, I've just told you, is 17,500, and you need to deduct that from the number of active copper services that sit on the Telstra network.
And that we're not
I
sure.
don't have that number as of today. I have a number that's older, that dates back to the 23rd of April, which is...
What was that?
It was about 18,400 from memory. Don't quote me on that.
No,
roughly.
I'm not trying to hold you to a 10 difference. I'm just trying to understand. So we're talking about 900
homes or so back there. I suspect that's where the Minister may have got roughly 750. Right. What we now need to get is the update from Telstra.
And can I just clarify, when you say the update from Telstra, I just assumed the number of existing fixed lines is a constant, short of people going for maybe naked DSL, but it's a constant, like the lines are either in there and working or not. Like I don't understand when you say you don't know what the difference between the number from a few weeks ago is today.
It changes. Telstra is You've got to recognise. This
No,
is the first
that's
time
what I'm asking.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand.
So this is Telstra's number. Telstra is going through the disconnection process. They're pulling all the systems together, and the number has been moving. They're now working to a position to give this update to us once a month. We're expecting the update over the next week. That'll be the final number of active copper services that are in play in the first 15 FSAMs, which you would deduct from the number of 17,500, and that would give you the remaining households that have not placed an order.
And it's hard for you to be able to identify them. Like I'm presuming maybe the delta was 3,000 6 weeks ago. I'm assuming.
Back in February.
Randomly picking a number.
Back in February it was 4,900, then it dropped to 3,600. And
but you've been targeting them.
Yep.
But from the sound of it, you're not able to try and target these remaining, let's say it is 800 or 900.
No, we will. Once we know once we match the active copper services to our location ID, we will actually be working with the RSPs to make calls and to also match them to our medical list to make sure that we understand why it is that whatever number, 500, 800 or 1,000, whatever that number of homes is, have not placed an order, such that if they haven't placed an order, they have done that knowingly, and it hasn't been a mistake that they have actually not placed an order, because this is the first time we've gone through this. No. So we're working quite diligently to make sure that no one is being disconnected because they've been uninformed. Now, we don't believe that's the case, but we're working through and case managing that. And
so when you say you don't believe that's the case, that they don't know that they've not been informed?
Correct. If you look at the number of pieces of communication, the knowledge in the market, so we're just trying to understand what it is. Is it because they're, as I mentioned before, we have created a medical register. We now have close to 40,000 records in that. We've identified some 440-odd users of medical services that we've...
Inside the 15 FSAMs?
Inside the first 15, which we've now tracked back to each premise, and we are working with the application service providers and the RSPs to ensure that they're...
So are they included in
they sure are.
1,500 or the 17,500, or you think that 400 makes up a fair chunk of the...
No, so
generically call it the 900?
Of the 447 that have a medical service, we already know that something like 347 have migrated.
They've already migrated.
There's 100 that have not migrated. Some have placed orders, some haven't, and we're working through that.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, now, I think Senator Urquhart wanted to ask a couple of questions, so I might just defer to her, and then when she's finished, come back.
Sure, thank you.
Senator Conroy, Senator Urquhart.
Okay, so I want to ask some specific Tasmanian questions, given that that's where I'm from, and I'm very interested in what's happening down there, and I know that a lot of Tasmanians are as well. So, according to your FOI response, the 81 FSAMs are distributed in the ACT. There's 2, New South Wales 12, Northern Territory 4, Queensland 17, South Australia 19, Victoria 8 and WA 19. According to this FOI, not a single design CI was issued in Tasmania between September 2013 and the 31st of March 2014. So have there been any design CIs been issued in Tasmania at all since September 2013?
Yes.
Yes? How many? And when?
Sorry?
How many and when?
Yeah, and again, the language design CI is foreign to me. Has there been designs issued?
Has there been any design CIs been? Have any design CIs been issued in Tasmania at all since September 2013? Because the FOI did not show that there have been any issued.
Oh,
and
okay.
that was between September
Again,
March.
according to your FOI response, 81 FSAMs are distributed in the ACT, New South Wales, NT, Queensland, SA, Vic and WA. Therefore, none in Tasmania.
Okay, so again...
So how come you could get that through but I couldn't?
Thank you.
Sorry.
He's got a friend.
So there's issued is the word. So the answer is, if the answer is 0, the answer that would be right. I don't think anybody would be taking a line on a FOI. Where my head was at was, we are working with Vision Stream, who had the design CIs issued originally and were working on them. They had a mass amount had been issued to them. So whilst work had come to a substantial slowdown given the issues between the delivery partner and NBN. I think it's well publicised that we found a way through that to get back to work. And they were, again, my apologies, they are working on existing design CIs that had been basically undertaken but not actioned.
Right.
So the answer of zero is when I think about it, issued is probably correct.
Right, okay. So your chairman said on radio in Tasmania on the 13th of February this year, and I'll quote, it was on ABC Radio on the 13th, so what Tasmanian households should look forward to is for the remainder of 2014, all the work will be a fibre-based work to households. By the end of this calendar year, we will have completed our plans for Tasmania and the country to decide and hopefully have completed negotiations with Telstra, which will enable us to decide where we can reuse Telstra networks, where we can use existing cable networks, and where we will have an all-fibre connection. So this year it remains all fibre. At the end of this year it will be a mixture. So that was what Mr Sikowski said on ABC Radio.
Yes.
So your chairman states quite plainly that for 2014 the rollout in Tasmania remains all fibre. The strategic review found that the build process takes on average 7.1 months. If you were continuing to roll out fibre to the premises in Tasmania, you would still be issuing the design CIs for fibre. Yet between September and the end of March, according to your answer to this FOI, you have issued none. So how can you continue to progress the fibre to the premises rollout in Tasmania when you're not issuing any of the design instructions?
Quite simply, there was a backlog of design instructions with our delivery partner down there. We signed an agreement with them to get work going in Tasmania again, as I said, which is well publicised. That was for 16 FSAMs from memory that had been designed. They are moving through them now, and that's part of our stabilising the rollout. And they have work ahead of them to build for this calendar year in fibre, absolutely in line with the chairman's statements.
So what's been happening in Tasmania?
Oh, exactly. So,
like your own figures, notwithstanding there was an anomaly that we can discuss at length later when Tassie's finished, there's been only 3,000 homes passed in 6 months.
Again, Senator, what we've said we're doing in Tasmania is making sure that as the rollout progresses, we're working with the delivery partner to do it in a way that delivers serviceable premises, which doesn't go at the pace of rolling out a premises pass network. This is all a part of correcting the rollout to make sure that as an FSAM is finished in any particular area, the activation process isn't as it is at the moment in Tasmania, where I know end users are quite upset because, as I pointed out earlier, an example where we get out to hook up a customer and there's a 620-metre lead-in required. What we're doing at the moment with our delivery partner in Tasmania is we're rolling the distribution network out and then following behind very closely, putting in the build drop, and it does slow it down, it absolutely does, but there's no rework. We don't go back 2, 3, 4 times when an area is declared ready for service and an end user rings up and orders a service.
If I could just interject.
Yeah, sure.
I was going to ask this a bit later, but you mentioned build drop versus demand drop. My recollection is that originally the company entered into construction contracts that were demand drop.
Correct.
For their first rung of contracts. The second rung of contracts, so there was the initial 15 FSAMs, if you like.
Yeah.
The second rung were largely converted. Now, on this one, I'm happy for other information to be the case, to build drop. So NBN's model for quite a considerable period of time. They probably haven't got to necessarily design phase into construction phase, to borrow your phrases. But NBN had already converted, as per its 2012-13 or 2013 plan, to a build drop model. In other words, going to the wall from the beginning of the process, which I accept would be a slower process. So is what you're saying in Tasmania, they've been doing build drop rather than demand drop in the streets? Which could explain a slower actual passing.
So can I just correct something? Well,
yeah,
different perceptions. There are no build drop contracts for the Tier 1 delivery partners. At this point in time, we're working to get those in place now. So I'm sorry that information is not correct.
The reason I say this is that I actually held a press conference with Mr Quigley where he announced the change in policy.
Well, wasn't implemented?
No, well, it hadn't maybe been signed, but they may not have, right, it's the same as me saying they may not have implemented it, but the actual policy decision to go to build drop had been taken. I actually stood next to Mr Quigley in a press conference and had quite a lengthy discussion about why it was actually revenue positive for the company.
Yeah.
So I'm interested that they hadn't actually got round to signing any.
No.
No, it's entirely possible. But as I said, I left before the end of the election, as you know.
Yeah.
But the management and the board had made a decision to go to build drop.
Correct.
So, but what you're saying to me now is you're doing build drop in Tasmania?
What I'm saying to you is we haven't actually done the one contract that is build drop, but what we're doing with our partner in Tasmania is we are following with a separate contract because we're still negotiating, bringing them together with our delivery partners so that as we let a particular geography or an FSAM to the contractor's responsibility is to take every premise passed up to, where possible, a PCD on the side of the house and make that premise serviceable. And I think you agree that's the best way to go.
I've never disagreed
That's right.
with that position.
But what we've done in Tasmania at the moment, which is slowing it down, is having the two contracts running together, one right behind the other, until we get the opportunity to join them. So that would explain why it has slowed down a bit. But I can also say that we are
premises
working...
passed, like genuinely on your own numbers, you've virtually had not a single premise, 3,000 in 5 months, since December when Mr Turnbull said it was back on track.
Mr Turnbull, I'm not aware of the exact quote. What we did in Tasmania was sit down with the delivery partner, which is Vision Stream, I think that's extremely well known, and try to address the issues that were confronting them in Tasmania. In the first instance, at least get them back to work. I think it's well documented that Tasmania had slowed down. I think at one point your words, Senator, was to a grinding halt or something. But that they were doing as much as they could under the circumstances. But I think they've demonstrated to us now that the working environment and the staccato nature of the work orders being issued was not conducive to them making money. So what they were attempting to do was negotiate with NBN Co to find a way through. We sat down with them, and as I said to you, I'm not sure if it was late December or early January, we found a way through. But as you know, and I know we've had this discussion before too, the Christmas period is, basically no one does work in the construction industry over Christmas.
Nearly June.
Mr. Adcock, how long have those issues been around in Tasmania? When you said you had to address these issues?
I started with NBN Co in mid-November last year. The issues were prevalent then. How far back they were, my whole job was to look
day
forward,
rate
not
versus metres laid rate.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Senator. To try and get the industry going, I understand that there was a day rate instrument in Tasmania, which was not an NBN Co instrument. NBN Co's engagement with its delivery partner was always around what was known as a schedule of rates, but responding apparently to discussions that I was not privy to. They went to a day rate type arrangement where the contracting fraternity get paid whether they do one premise or 10. And what happened, as has been explained to me, is that our delivery partner, in coming to that arrangement, ended up losing substantial amounts of money. And so we found an arrangement to get them back to work, and we're working with them. Again, probably one of the reasons that it appears to be slow is that rather than sitting there and fighting a contract with them, we're sitting down there and working on the process to improve it, to make sure that, as we roll forward in Tasmania under any technology, the environment within which we're rolling out the network with them is an environment where
people aren't losing money. I've been in this industry long enough to know that, anywhere where your contractor or your subcontractor is losing money and going broke always costs you more in the long run. So in the spirit of cooperation and trying to get, stability back in the industry, we chose Tasmania first up as the state to, okay, let's go down there, let's be very transparent and let's work with the contractor to get back on track.
Thanks, Mr Adcock. I just want to keep going because I've got some other points that I want to get to. So, how many build CIs have been issued in Tasmania since December?
How many build CIs have been issued in Tasmania since December? If you bear with me, I will give you that number. I'm at a point now where you say build CIs. We have issued instructions for an additional 6,000 premises passed at this point in time.
No, that's premises passed.
Yes, I will revert to you with the number of build CIs that covers those premises. I have a total. I'll take that on notice and come back with the since December.
Okay. So according to your weekly rollout stats, NBN Co has passed 5,500 premises in Tasmania over the past 6 months. And the quote that the minister made when you were talking about it a minute ago was that work on the NBN rollout, and he said this on the 4th of February, in Tasmania is back on track. Just before Christmas, NBN Co and the prime contractor in Tasmania, which I think you've just outlined, Vision Stream, agreed to get the rollout going again after many months of stoppages and slow delivery.
Correct.
So what is happening in Tasmania when the new management of NBN Co has passed only 5,500 premises in the last 6 months, about 211 a week? But I'm not sure that you're designing any CIs at all. You can't put your finger on that number. You've issued build CIs for only 3 for SAM since December, and a number of the key contractors in Tasmania are suing the principal delivery partner, Vision Stream. So has it been shut down completely in Tasmania, or?
Far from it. I think I just spent a fair amount of time explaining what we're doing to make sure that going forward we get it right. I think in the agreement we have with Vision Stream down there, I'm quite open. We've signed an agreement to do 16 FSAMs, and we're working with them on designing further ones. Okay,
all right. So I'll just keep pushing on. Have there been any developments in the legal action being brought by Mr Bullock and Mr Burns, and presumably others against Vision Stream?
That's not a legal action that we're involved in. You'll have to take that up with Vision Stream.
Okay. All right. I just want to go to the aerial rollout, the Tasmanian aerial trial. So the strategic review was released in December last year. Section 6.1.3 says in part, and I quote, NBN Co has received a proposal from the Tasmanian Government which suggests greater use of aerial in fibre to the premises deployment. NBN Co will explore this suggestion as one way of improving momentum. From December to February, what has NBN Co done in exploring this option?
Well, we've been in very involved discussions with Aurora around running an aerial trial.
Right, okay. So when NBN Co Executive Chair Ziggy Swiskowski was interviewed on ABC Radio on the 13th of February, broke the Coalition's promise to complete their fibre to the premises rollout in Tasmania. In doing so, did he make any reference to the proposal to use aerial deployment?
On the radio interview?
He was interviewed on ABC Radio on the 13th of February.
Get your chairman under control.
I will get the transcript of the radio interview and come back to you.
We'll get it to you much quicker. You won't even have left.
We'll send it to you.
Well,
yep.
Okay. Is the question, did the chairman mention an aerial trial on the radio interview on the 13th of February?
The question is, when he was interviewed on ABC on the 13th of February, we believe that he's broke the Coalition's promise to complete the fibre to the premises rollout in Tasmania, because in doing so, did he make any reference to the proposal to use aerial deployment?
Have you got the transcript,
It's not
Senator
about,
Urquhart?
not on me, I haven't, but we can get it.
Oh, well, if you've read it, I'm sure if you've read it, you'd answer the question, isn't it?
And from memory, Senator, I think
I can answer the question. Yes, he did.
The question that was asked of him was, has the coalition quote promise been broken? And I think from memory, the chairman answered that no, it hadn't. I can't actually recall the exact words. As I said, I'm happy to look at the transcript. But I think the discussion went down the lines that the strategic review has provided the opportunity to look at a faster and more efficient and more cost-effective way of deploying high-speed broadband to all of Tasmania, and that we were looking at what options that were now available to NBN Co. Far from breaking any promise, I think the chairman responded that as soon as we are continuing to deploy fibre, which is one of the choices available to us this calendar year, and you've quoted that back to me earlier in this discussion, and that as we sort of understand what and we work through what the design and selection criteria are for the multi-technology mix, we would be very clear on how we would deliver high-speed broadband to all of Tasmania.
Okay, so the opposition leader then, Mr Hodgman, flew to Sydney on about around the 18th of February, 19th of February to raise his concerns with Mr Turnbull.
No, to see Bruce Springsteen and then...
Oh, of course, I forgot about that, yeah. Was Mr Turnbull provided with any briefing by NBN Co for that meeting?
I'm not aware of any briefing that was provided.
Is anyone else aware?
No, I'm not. I didn't provide a briefing.
Would you be the normal person who would provide a briefing?
I would be asked for input. I don't recall being asked for input.
Okay. So, in particular, was Mr Turnbull provided with any advice on the company's discovery in exploring the option for aerial deployment?
The company's discovery? Can you please explain?
Well, the issue of the aerial trial, was Mr Turnbull provided with any advice in exploring the option for aerial development, either prior to the meeting with Mr Hodgman or at some stage?
Not to my knowledge. As I understand, the chairman had agreed to look at the options for a trial, and as I've said, once that agreement was made, we've been in long and involved discussions with Aurora about how best to deploy that trial.
So I guess the question that I'm asking is, was the Minister provided with a briefing between the 18th of February and the 22nd of February advising the Minister that NBN Co now proposed to embrace the aerial development?
Not to my knowledge.
Could you take that on notice and confirm that or deny it, one or the other?
I'll take it on notice.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to get some clarity here. Was the Minister announcing a decision made independently by NBN Co management, or was the Minister making a political decision which he was imposing on NBN? So you don't know because you haven't provided any information.
I'll take it on notice.
Greg, I think the point about was the Minister directing us, management, to do anything to do with the aerial, the answer is no.
No, the chairman made the decision.
So no.
Right. There was no direction that was given to management in that regard.
But did you provide any advice?
I did not provide any advice. I'm afraid that in 8 weeks in it would not be good advice.
Okay, so on the 23rd of May, the Tasmanian Premier Hodgman welcomed the announcement of the 2 new FSAMs in Tasmania, and the Premier then said, and I quote, "I'm very pleased to announce work is already underway at both sites to increase the area of development, with 107 poles being utilised at the Glebe and 183 at Riverside. What percentage of those premises in those 2 FSAMs will now be completed using aerial deployment?"
I'll take that on notice and come back.
Did NBN Co put out a release of its own to highlight the use of the aerial deployment?
No, we did not.
So did you not do that because you didn't think that it was significant?
The two FSAMs that you're referring to are business as usual.
So can you tell me why the trials are necessary when an aerial rollout of the NBN in Tasmania has already been done? So the CEPU has pointed out that 17,500 Tasmanian homes had already been connected to the NBN using above-ground electricity poles and wires, with communities including Deloraine, Georgetown, Scottsdale, Smithton, Sorrel, South Hobart, St Helens and Triabunna.
As I recall, again, the environment in which the trial was put up was the assertion that the aerial trial could be deployed faster and quicker and more cost effectively. And from memory, the conversations went along the lines that those first FSAMs that you referred to had been extremely expensive because they were the first release sites. Senator, you'd remember that. That was the first deployment. And
tables have been tabled.
Yeah, and so I understand the rationale for looking at another trial was to see, as people had learned from those first FSAMs and as NBN Co had matured in its processes, and as Aurora had sort of, as I understood, again, made the assertion that it was, much cheaper and more cost-effective to do it aerial. As I understand, everyone agreed, OK, well, let's do a trial and see if it is.
But there had already been a trial before, so were you doing another trial to see if it was cheaper than the first trial? Is that...
No, I don't think there'd been a trial before. The first 5 FSAMs were deployed using aerial. That wasn't a trial. That was the very initial rollout, and as I understand, looking back historically, a very expensive deployment because it was brand new. It's not unexpected when you're doing something for the first time that there'd be high costs. It's not a criticism, it's a statement of fact.
Yeah. So
Senator, is that your recollection?
Just to quickly tables showed that the prices were coming down. It's only after Mr Russell got his hands on them, they started going up.
So, all right, the Premier continued, and I'll quote, "This work represents early and significant progress by the Liberal government as meaningfully helping NBN Co with the rollout in a timely and cost-effective way. It's also part of the government's continuing effort to support the fibre to the premises model." So is the Premier suggesting that these FSAMs indicate that the full deployment in Tasmania will now be completed using fibre to the premises?
You'll have to ask the Premier. I don't sign off the Premier's press releases.
But is that how you would understand that?
It's not as I understand it. The Premier's press releases come from the Premier's office.
Well, it's a
as I've said to you previously, we're rolling out fibre to the premise using our usual deployment methods in Tasmania with our delivery partner this financial year, and we're working with them looking forward as to what a multi-technology mix will bring.
Okay. Steve, I'll hand back to you if you like.
Sorry?
We're running low on time.
11 o'clock, store
No, we've got 4 hours with NBN. Yes, we have. Senator Conroy, 4 hours. We started a half hour early. We'll be finishing at 10:30.
You actually don't get to overturn a Senate resolution just because you've decided to. So Senate has decided the estimates take place this week.
In previous, it's never happened that way.
No, let's be very clear.
We
no one has previously closed down.
We will be finishing at 10:30.
You are closing down. Just so the NBN officials are aware, this just means you're coming back more often to the other committee because they come along.
If I can make the NBN officials aware.
So let's be clear. You've got to tell them, stop it. Let him ask his questions and we can get on with our job. When you have the guts to do that, you'll stop getting called all the time.
If I could just tell NBN that
you'll be back
the
here
facts of this.
so often you'll be bored out of your brain. If they're not going to let us ask the questions when we've got half an hour to go and they're going to send you home early by closing down the estimates committees, you get to come back more often. So you might want to have a chat with someone about it.
Senator Conroy, you used to try and chair the committees when you're on this side of the table. You're still trying to chair them on that side of the table. You're not in the chair, which is Senator Williams.
You're not allowed to close down Senator
Order.
I'm just putting out the Senator Williams.
I'll make this point.
No, he doesn't get to close it down.
Order, Senator Conroy. I'll make this point. We had 4 hours stipulated for NBN.
No, you decided.
The committee decided, which
You
is
decided.
more than we could get last
You
year when you were in
decided.
government, by the
You
way.
decided. Don't pretend the committee unanimously agreed
And
to
we've
this.
started half hour. The
You
committee will shut
decided.
down at 10:30. If you want more time, go ahead, or you can waste time, take your pick.
You are closing down a committee,
You betcha.
and everyone in the country is listening and
On the
watching.
point of order, I think
And you
Senator
are closing
Williams
down a
is just.
committee early.
I think Senator Williams is following the Cameron precedent.
Exactly.
No, he's not. You don't
And,
close
and,
down
and many
a
other
committee.
chairs
Let's
from
be
we
very
weren't
clear.
have been as close as Senator
Let's be
Fifield.
very clear. This timetable is not agreed.
You've got six
This is
minutes.
you
You've got
using your
6 minutes.
numbers.
Do you want to use your time or don't you?
You are closing down a committee, Senator Williams, before 11 o'clock for no reason at all. It is on your head and nobody else's.
That's fine.
It means
I'll take it
NBN
on my head.
officials
We've given
will
you
be
4
coming
hours
back regularly.
and
Now,
more
don't-
than you would give us when
don't-
we were in opposition, I
You
can tell you.
don't decide. You don't decide. We're only allowed to have it for 4 hours. It's not how estimates works.
We've done it all week.
It's not how estimates work.
Yes, Senator.
This is not
Senator
agreed.
Urquhart. Yes, Senator Urquhart.
I want to say that we have a timetable in front of us
Yep.
that says we shall adjourn at 11 p.m. So
Well, if that was the case, I also had a timetable saying we'd commence NBN at 5:45.
No,
We start
you
at
decided
no,
5:15.
no, no.
You decided
that's
that.
not.
Yep, that's right.
It's not.
You decided
this
that.
says that we finish at 11 p.m.
We'll close at 10:30. If you want to call a private meeting, you can, Senator
No, it's not
Urquhart.
a private meeting. We can get some advice from the clerk about whether or not you can unilaterally close the Senate Estimates Committee early.
It's committee's decision.
It's not the
We
committee's
make a
decision.
Well, the committee doesn't agree.
Sorry,
Well,
the committee,
do you want
the
to have
committee
a
has a
meeting now?
timetable in front of it that
Do
says
you want to
11
call a meeting
o'clock.
now?
No.
Continue. You've got 5 minutes, Senator Conroy.
So you're closing the committee down
You
early.
betcha. I've said that to
You're
you.
closing it down half an hour early.
Yes, I'm giving you the 4 hours stipulated for NBN,
No, you
and
don't
the
get
4
to
hours
stipulate.
expired.
You don't get to
The longer
stipulate.
you argue, the less questions you ask, I can assure you that.
No, it just means I'll call them back for 6 hours instead of 3 hours next time.
You're not even on the committee. The committee calls them, not you.
I'm not talking
You might
about
think
you.
you used to run
They
the
know
show. I'm
exactly
sorry
what
you
I'm
don't
talking
now.
about. They know exactly
Would
what
you
I'm
like to
talking
ask a
about.
final question?
They know exactly what I'm talking about. So there'll be a 6-hour hearing very soon to finish the questions that you won't let us ask. Okay, just so we're clear, they're doing this.
Come off it.
You're doing it.
We're not going to be blackmailed.
We're not being blackmailed. You've just decided you can close the committee down when you want.
We've said 4 hours here and 4
No,
hours
you
down
said.
expires.
You said this was
Yeah,
never
yeah, exactly.
agreed. Never agreed.
Continue on.
I've said that. I've raised it.
So we're just making it very clear to you, you don't get to unilaterally close down estimates committees early because you want to go home.
We better have 4 hours.
Because
You
you
want
wanna
the
go
time
home.
stipulated as agreed to.
It's not agreed to. You
went
can
in on the
say we
committee
imposed it on you, but you cannot say this was agreed.
You cannot say it was agreed.
So let's be
You
clear. Let's
exercised
expose
your
the rubbish.
numbers
Would
at
you
a
like to ask
committee.
another question?
So
Can I just make a point that we closed the committee down 2 hours early yesterday?
Yeah.
And
2
wasted
hours
time
early.
when we could have had
Well,
time.
you could have
to
used
get
your
in.
time.
And we
No.
negotiated.
What you decided you
You
wanted to
denied
talk to
us the
Australia Post
time.
for 4 hours.
And then didn't have any
Okay.
members here to ask them
We
questions.
will now meet. There'll be a meeting. Thank you. Back shortly. Question till 25 to 11, Senator Conroy. Away you go.
Well, it's very kind of you to decide what we can have, but I just want to make clear to anyone listening and the public that for the second time today the government have used its numbers. The first was to refuse to allow us to table a document that's available on a publicly available website. The Senate wasn't allowed to have that tabled, and now after refusing to allow longer questioning for NBN because the coalition senators said they wanted 4 hours for Australia Post, they then closed up shop for 2 hours last night to go and watch the State of Origin probably, but they actually ran out of questions after forcing 4 hours of questions and refused to the request from Labor senators to have longer to deal with NBN. We could have had 2 extra hours if the coalition hadn't chosen to go for 4 hours and then close down after 2 hours with Australia Post. So let me be very clear about this. This is not an agreed timetable, and we will continue to call you back to the other committee more regularly than we otherwise would because of the farce that we're engaged in here. The government can use its numbers here all it wants, but all that does is disrupt the actual work of NBN Co, because we try and keep it as constrained as we can. We try and fit you into mornings and days so that you only come once every now and then. But as you can see, continually they filibuster and waste time, and therefore we'll be calling you back again soon. I'm sorry about that. We'd rather have had more time in the allotted time that you knew you were going to be here, but if the Coalition want to use their numbers to filibuster, repeat questions they've asked 72 times before, just so they can get you to say them over and over again, and then...
I think Senator Conroy is talking to himself, so I think I think the rest of us can depart at this point.
So 25 to 11, I'll be shutting it down, Minister.
But let's be very clear. The Senate has said that we should sit till 11 o'clock for estimates, and Senator Williams has used his casting vote on the committee.
The committee has agreed to adjourn at 25 to 11.
To close us down early. The published document says 11 o'clock.
I think the overall resolution of the Senate would have us 6 or 11.
Yeah.
Chair,
Yes,
I should just observe that last night the committee wasn't closed down. The opposition senators ran out of questions.
We didn't ask for Australian Post for 4 hours.
The government demanded
4 hours for Australian Post.
We didn't
filibuster for 4 hours.
Opposition senators ran out of questions for Australian Post. And today, Senator Williams has been managing the proceedings of the committee. I think following the precedents of Senator Cameron when he chaired Senate committees, where if a committee was ahead of schedule, Senator Cameron often concluded proceedings
with
early
the agreement of everybody. With agreement of everybody. But there's no agreement.
Continue, Minister.
But anyway, finally, I just observed that I think Senator Conroy, after 6 years, is trying to make up for wasted time.
Chair?
Yes, Senator Urquhart.
I just want to reflect on and correct what the Minister has just said. We did not run out of questions on Australia Post. We argued with the government about the time for Australia Post. The government insisted on a 4-hour block for Australia Post.
We didn't want it.
We argued that we would want an hour and 32 hours maximum. So it wasn't the opposition that ran out of questions, it was actually the government. And as a result of that, we're now 2 hours less in utilising that time with NBN, which we could have made very good use of that time. The other issue that I just want to set the Hansard straight on is earlier today when we talked about the witnesses that would appear for NBN Co, we requested a number of NBN officials to come, and yes, the government did agree to a couple of extra ones that we asked for, but there were some that weren't, and we did give that information to Mr Greg Catch, who's in, is it Catch?
Greg Catchell.
Catchell, sorry, out of Senator Williams' office on the 14th of May, so I just wanted to correct the record on that. That was handed to Mr Catchell in a meeting we were at by Matthew Neshan from my office.
I will check that with my staff, but I believe that is not the case, but that was certainly checked out. You have 2 minutes, Senator Conroy. Would you like to ask a question?
This is the second of the documents that I asked, or the committee members asked to be tabled. This one was allowed to be tabled because it was actually the NBN's own document. So I'm just looking at your strategic review. Apologies, I'm not sure what page it is. Has this been passed out? This was agreed. This was allowed to be, given that you printed it. So we have a sequencing of key activities, not indicative of network completion date. So we'd like to be able to judge against how you were going. The problem is it's redacted completely.
Can I just ask, for clarity, which of the two strategic review are you referring to? Is it the December one or the fixed wireless?
It's final. No, we're talking about the December one. Final report, December version 12 December. So it's this page. I'm just getting it now.
Page 109.
Yeah. So we'd actually like to be able to judge how you're going. Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. 109. The paperclip was on it. But unfortunately, we can't actually test you on a single KPI because you've redacted your entire document. Any chance that we can get an unredacted copy so we could actually judge how you're going against your own benchmarks?
Well, I think as I've explained earlier to Senator Ludlam, one of the reasons why this was redacted was not to harm our negotiation position with a number of parties that we had to renegotiate new terms. These would have included conversations with new service delivery partners and also the negotiation with Telstra. So that's the reason why the decision was made to black out.
So the Parliament, people of Australia, have no ability to judge whether you're doing your job or not.
If that information had been made public, it would have potentially harmed our position in negotiating a deal with Telstra. As far as the progress of NBN Co. And release to the public, there is many information that we put on the website that are explaining the number of premises that we passed.
Not one single thing we can actually judge you as to whether you've met your full.
Order. Time has expired. That concludes the Senate estimates. Order. I'm speaking.
Yeah, I'd like to qualify. This is my last estimates hearing, Chair.
Go ahead, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. I know you're about to shut down the hearing, but I really wanted to take the opportunity to thank the committee staff from this committee and all of the other committees that I've had the great honour of serving on over the last 6 years. I've learnt a lot by being involved in the estimates committees as well as all of the other committee inquiries. It's been, a great honour to be able to contribute to those processes, and I'm very grateful for the work that all the staff in the committee secretariats and Hansard have done over many years. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. And on behalf of the committee, could I wish you well in your future, in your health and your exciting things in front of you. And at that concludes the Senate estimates into Environment Communications. Could I thank Hansard, could I thank the staff, and thank you all in attendance, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, Senator.